Tonight, we're traveling back more than 200 million years to a world that was pushed to the edge again and again, where life nearly disappeared and yet somehow never fully did. Earth has not always been kind to life. 5 times in its history, the planet crossed a line where survival became rare. Forests collapsed, oceans lost oxygen, skies darkened with ash and gas. Each time, the rules of living were rewritten. Whole families of animals vanished forever. Creatures that once ruled land and sea disappeared from the fossil record, never to return. And yet, in the very same layers of stone that record these endings, we find traces of a lineage that never fully left, present before the dinosaurs, living alongside them, and still here long after they were gone. These animals were never the fastest, never the largest, never the rulers of open land. They occupied rivers, swamps, and coastlines that changed shape as climates swung between heat and cold. While the world broke repeatedly, their bodies remained quietly familiar, carrying the same basic form through firestorms, frozen ages, and collapsing food webs. They did not escape extinction by winning. They endured by fitting into a planet that refused to stay stable. But what kind of animal persists when most life is erased from the earth? How did a body built for patience outlast creatures built for speed and power? And why does survival across deep time look so different from success? Tonight, we begin tracing the long patience of a lineage that watched the world end more than once. But before we begin, if you're already enjoying this peaceful moment, it would mean the world to me if you gave this video a like, maybe even subscribed, if you'd like more sleepy science stories like this. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you winding down from tonight, and what time is it there? I love watching our little bedtime map light up, one dreamer at a time. So now, take a breath, let your shoulders soften, and together, let us step softly into the deep ancient story of how the crocodiles survived every mass extinction. Mass extinctions are often imagined as moments when life simply fails, when the planet becomes so violent that survival turns into a matter of chance. But in the quiet record left behind by stone and sediment, these events reveal a far more precise character. A true mass extinction is not defined by drama or speed alone, it is defined by reach. It unfolds when loss spreads across continents, across oceans, across climates, cutting through ecosystems that had never touched each other before. Life does not just thin out in one place, it collapses everywhere at once, leaving no easy refuge where familiar rules still apply. Most extinctions, even severe ones, are local stories. A forest burns and the animals flee or perish. A sea warms and a reef fades. Nearby, another region continues unchanged, untouched by the crisis. Life absorbs these losses and grows again around the edges. Evolution has learned how to tolerate this kind of damage. Populations shrink, range lines shift, and new species eventually emerge. These are wounds the planet has endured many times. Mass extinctions are different because the damage does not stay contained. The stress multiplies and spreads. Temperature shifts occur alongside chemical changes in the oceans. Air composition drifts beyond familiar bounds. Food webs unravel from both ends at once, with producers faltering and consumers losing their foundation. Habitats do not merely change shape, they disappear altogether. What once supported life becomes silent, not for seasons, but for spans of time long enough to erase entire lineages. These events are rare because the planet itself must be pushed far from its usual balance. Earth carries powerful systems that resist sudden transformation. Oceans store heat, atmospheres mix slowly, geological cycles regulate gases over long ages. To overwhelm these safeguards requires forces of unusual scale or duration. When those forces finally align, the result is not random destruction, but a harsh form of selection that cuts far deeper than ordinary natural pressure. During a mass extinction, survival is not granted to the strongest or the most successful species of the previous era. In fact, those traits often become liabilities. Animals finely tuned to abundant resources find themselves exposed when those resources vanish. Specialization, which thrives in stable worlds, becomes a narrow corridor with no exit. Size, speed, intelligence, and dominance lose their usual meaning when the environment itself no longer cooperates. Local die-offs test flexibility within a familiar framework. Global collapse removes the framework entirely. Temperature extremes arrive without warning or relief. Seasons lose their predictability. Coastlines advance and retreat. Oxygen levels fluctuate, altering which bodies can function at all. In these moments, extinction operates less like competition and more like filtration. Traits are not rewarded because they excel, but because they endure. Bodies that waste little energy persist where high performance designs cannot be sustained. This is why mass extinctions leave such uneven legacies. Some modest, unremarkable organisms cross boundaries that wipe out vast empires of life. Others vanish despite having thrived for millions of years. The process does not measure progress or potential. It responds only to immediate survival under constraints that strip life to its essentials: breath, shelter, energy, reproduction. Anything beyond those fundamentals becomes optional and often fatal. The difference between collapse and continuity lies not in ambition, but in compatibility with scarcity. Metabolism becomes destiny, diet becomes a gamble, reproductive speed becomes a risk rather than an advantage. When ecosystems shrink, even success becomes dangerous because it demands maintenance the world can no longer provide. Extinction favors those that can retreat into simplicity without breaking. Seen this way, mass extinction is not a punishment and not a cleansing force. It is a narrowing. Possibilities fall away until only certain forms remain viable within a transformed planet. What survives is not better in any moral or progressive sense. It is simply aligned with the new conditions long enough to persist. Understanding this shifts the story of survival away from heroism and toward humility. Life does not triumph by improving itself faster than catastrophe. It survives by already being close to the limits catastrophe imposes. In the deepest layers of time, endurance is quiet, uncelebrated, and often invisible until everything else is gone. Long before dinosaurs filled the land with size and spectacle, the world was already uneasy. The Triassic did not open with peace or stability. It opened into a planet still adjusting to loss, still recovering its breath. Continents were drawn together into a single immense landmass, stretching from pole to pole, locking climates into extremes, inland regions baked beneath relentless heat, coastal margins swung between flood and drought. Life returned cautiously, as if unsure whether the ground beneath it would remain. In this unsettled world, the earliest relatives of crocodiles took shape. They were not rulers, and they were not rare curiosities either. They moved through riverbanks, floodplains, and shallow waters, sharing space with many lineages that would never reach the next great boundary of time. Their forms varied widely. Some walked tall on long limbs, others hugged the ground. Some hunted actively, others waited. What tied them together was not dominance, but tolerance. They existed comfortably within instability, as if their bodies already expected the land to shift beneath them. The Triassic climate offered little forgiveness. Seasons arrived with sharp edges, rain fell in bursts, then vanished for long stretches. Rivers expanded suddenly, then withdrew into narrow channels. Oxygen levels fluctuated. Wildfires swept across dry interiors, leaving vast stretches of ash where forests once stood. For many animals, survival required constant motion, constant effort, constant adjustment. For early crocodile relatives, survival leaned instead toward restraint. Their bodies were built for balance rather than excess. Muscle did not demand constant fuel. Skin formed a quiet shield against dehydration and heat. Movement could be slow without becoming fragile. When water vanished, they retreated with it. When prey thinned, they endured the absence. Their success did not depend on perfect conditions, because perfect conditions rarely existed. This was not a world that rewarded innovation for its own sake. It favored designs that could function across contradiction. Heat followed cold, wetness followed dust, abundance dissolved into scarcity without warning. Evolution in the Triassic did not offer steady paths forward, it delivered interruptions. The creatures that persisted were those that could pause, wait, and resume without loss of function. Early crocodile relatives learned this rhythm from the beginning. They were shaped by danger not as an occasional challenge, but as a constant presence. Their environments did not allow complacency. Floods could bury nests, droughts could empty entire valleys, prey could vanish for months. Survival meant being ready for absence as much as for opportunity. While other lineages refined speed or specialized diets, these reptiles remained flexible without appearing advanced. They took what the land allowed without demanding more. Their reproduction did not require precise timing tied to stable seasons. Their growth was measured, patient, unhurried. Each trait carried the quiet assumption that tomorrow might not resemble today. As the Triassic progressed, ecosystems grew denser and more complex. New predators emerged. Competition sharpened. Yet the early crocodilian body plan did not race to keep up. It remained broadly compatible with change, rather than optimized for any single moment. This conservatism was not stagnation, it was awareness written into muscle and bone. When dinosaurs began their ascent, they did so in landscapes already shared with these older forms. The future giants appeared in flashes of success, experimenting with size, speed, and reach. Early crocodile relatives did not challenge them directly. They occupied different spaces, different tempos. Rivers, wetlands, and margins became quiet corridors of continuity, while the land above reshaped itself again and again. By the time dinosaurs claimed dominance, crocodilian ancestors had already lived through centuries of uncertainty. Their lineage had been tested not by singular catastrophe, but by prolonged instability. This early exposure to danger did not harden them into specialists of disaster. It simply prevented them from ever expecting safety. The Triassic gave them no gentle beginning. It taught them endurance before abundance, patience before power. Long before mass extinction would carry names and boundaries, these animals were already shaped by a world that could turn hostile without warning. Their story begins not with triumph, but with quiet persistence, learning how to remain whole in a planet that rarely stood still. The first great trial arrived quietly at first, without a single defining moment that could be seen or heard from the ground. Life during the late Triassic had spread outward again, filling valleys and coastlines with new complexity. Forests stood taller, food webs stretched longer. Reptiles that once shared space cautiously now pressed into dominance, their bodies large, active, and increasingly specialized. The planet appeared, from the surface, to be healing. Beneath that appearance, pressure was building. Far from the rivers and floodplains, deep fractures opened within the crust. Lava did not erupt as a brief catastrophe, but as a prolonged release, pouring out over immense regions again and again. These eruptions unfolded over long spans of time, releasing gases that slowly altered the atmosphere. Carbon accumulated, heat followed. What made this moment dangerous was not violence alone, but persistence. The planet did not receive a single blow. It was held within a rising fever that did not break. As temperatures climbed, familiar balances began to slip. Rainfall patterns shifted without settling into new rhythms. Seasons blurred. Dry periods lengthened while storms grew abrupt and intense. Oceans absorbed heat and chemistry changed quietly, making survival more difficult without immediate signs of collapse. Life continued, but it did so under increasing strain, as though every system was being asked to work harder with less margin for error. Dominant species of the Triassic had evolved for abundance. Their bodies required steady food supplies. Their growth was rapid. Their success depended on ecosystems remaining productive and predictable. As warmth spread and oxygen levels fluctuated, those assumptions failed. Vegetation patterns shifted faster than herbivores could follow. Predators dependent on active prey found fewer opportunities. Each layer of the food web thinned unevenly, creating gaps where energy once flowed smoothly. The end Triassic extinction did not remove life gently. It removed coherence. Habitats did not disappear all at once. Instead, they lost their reliability. Rivers no longer followed familiar courses. Coastal regions alternated between flooding and retreat. Forests suffered repeated stress rather than a single fatal blow. For animals built to thrive at peak performance, this instability proved fatal. Their designs demanded consistency that the planet could no longer provide. Many of the most dominant reptiles vanished during this period. Their disappearance can appear sudden in the fossil record, not because the event was brief, but because decline left few survivors to extend their lineage forward. Once populations dropped below a certain threshold, recovery was impossible. Reproduction slowed, genetic diversity narrowed, entire branches ended not with dramatic deaths, but with silence. While these losses unfolded, early crocodile relatives occupied the margins. They were not insulated from heat or disruption. They endured the same warming air and shifting waters. Yet their lives were structured around tolerance rather than intensity. Their metabolisms did not demand constant intake. Their bodies functioned across wider temperature ranges. When prey diminished, they did not collapse. They waited. When water changed course, they followed slowly or remained still until it returned. This difference did not make them immune. Many lineages within the broader crocodilian family also vanished. Survival was uneven and incomplete. But the traits that endured were those that did not depend on a stable world. Energy conservation mattered more than strength. Flexibility mattered more than specialization. The ability to persist through absence mattered more than the ability to dominate abundance. As volcanic gases continued to warm the planet, extinction selected quietly. It did not measure intelligence or speed, it filtered by endurance. Species that burned hot and fast exhausted themselves. Species that could slow their internal pace continued, even as the environment unraveled around them. This was not victory, it was compatibility with crisis. By the time the eruptions eased and climates began to settle into new patterns, the world had changed its cast of characters. Many former rulers were gone. New opportunities opened, not because space was available, but because competition had thinned. Life resumed not by returning to what it had been, but by moving forward with fewer options. For the crocodilian lineage, this moment reinforced a lesson already learned. Survival did not arrive through escalation, it arrived through restraint. The first time the world nearly ended, their continuation was not dramatic. It was quiet, carried forward by bodies that asked little of a planet that was giving less and less. As the age of dinosaurs unfolded, the land grew crowded with scale and motion. Bodies rose higher, strides lengthened, and shadows stretched farther across floodplains and forests. Dinosaurs came to define this long era, not only through size, but through presence. They filled open ground with movement and sound, reshaping ecosystems around their needs. Yet, alongside these giants, another lineage continued almost unnoticed, woven into the same world but never competing for its center. Crocodilian ancestors did not vanish as dinosaurs diversified. They remained present from the margins inward, inhabiting rivers, wetlands, coastlines, and lowlands that intersected with dinosaur territory without belonging to it. While towering herbivores stripped vegetation and great predators followed them across open ground, these reptiles lingered closer to water, where boundaries softened and energy flowed differently. Their lives unfolded in slower rhythms, matched to currents and seasons, rather than to pursuit and dominance. They were not apex rulers of the land because their bodies were never shaped for that role. Long limbs and constant motion belonged to creatures built for endurance across wide terrain. Crocodilian forms retain proportions suited for ambush and patience. Their strength lay not in chasing, but in waiting. Their jaws delivered sudden power without requiring prolonged exertion. This design limited their reach on land, but it freed them from dependence on expansive, stable ecosystems. Remaining outside the highest ranks of terrestrial dominance offered subtle protection. Apex predators depend on abundance, on layered food webs that support large populations of prey. When those systems strain, the largest and most demanding bodies feel the loss first. By never fully stepping into that role, crocodilian relatives avoided its costs. They required fewer calories, less constant success, and smaller territories to persist. Dinosaurs reshaped landscapes through grazing, migration, and sheer weight. In their wake, water systems became even more important. Rivers acted as corridors of life, concentrating resources in a world increasingly shaped by dry interiors and seasonal extremes. Crocodilians thrived in these transitional zones, where land and water blended. Here, they could feed opportunistically, rest for long periods, and retreat from change rather than confront it. Their presence alongside giants was steady rather than spectacular. Fossils show continuity in form even as dinosaur lineages rose and fell around them. While other reptiles chased novelty, crocodilian bodies shifted slowly, refining rather than reinventing. Armor thickened, jaws strengthened, internal systems favored efficiency. None of this pushed them into dominance, but all of it allowed them to remain functional across wide environmental ranges. The spotlight of evolution often shines brightest on dramatic success. During the age of dinosaurs, that light followed size, speed, and ecological control. Crocodilians stayed just outside its reach. Their strategy did not demand attention, it asked only that they persist. By avoiding constant competition with land giants, they reduced exposure to the pressures that drove rapid change. Stability, rather than supremacy, became their defining trait. As climates fluctuated and continents continued to shift, this quiet position proved resilient. When droughts shrank habitats, rivers still flowed in some form. When vegetation patterns changed, aquatic and semi-aquatic food sources remained available. Crocodilian ancestors did not need the land to behave predictably. They needed only enough water, enough prey, and enough time. Living alongside giants also meant learning restraint. Direct conflict with dinosaurs would have been costly and unnecessary. Crocodilians did not evolve toward confrontation. They evolved toward coexistence through separation, different spaces, different tempos, different demands. This separation lowered risk over long spans of time, allowing survival without requiring escalation. By the height of the dinosaur era, crocodilian relatives had become fixtures of the background. They were neither relics nor rulers. They were occupants of a quieter niche, stable enough to endure as the cast around them changed. Their survival during this long age did not come from winning the evolutionary contest for dominance. It came from never fully entering it, from remaining adaptable, patient, and comfortably outside the glare of power. The end of the Cretaceous did not arrive as a gradual closing. It arrived as a sudden break in continuity, as if the sky itself had shifted allegiance. For millions of years, life had adjusted to slow changes in climate and geography. Dinosaurs occupied the land with confidence shaped by long stability. Forests and seas moved in rhythms that, while complex, remained familiar. Then, a single event altered every surface at once. The impact did not end the world through force alone. Its deeper power lay in transformation. Heat surged across continents in moments, igniting landscapes far beyond the place of contact. Shockwaves rippled through the crust. Dust and vapor rose into the upper atmosphere, forming a veil that dimmed the sun. What followed was not immediate silence, but confusion. Days lost their clarity. Temperatures swung beyond seasonal memory. The sky ceased to behave like a source of consistency and became an unpredictable presence overhead. Firestorms raced across dry land, consuming vegetation that had taken centuries to assemble. In other regions, flames never arrived, not because they were spared, but because darkness soon suppressed them. Ash and debris drifted downward for months, settling into soils and waterways. Plants struggled to photosynthesize beneath a muted sky. Growth slowed, then stopped. The base of the food web weakened without drama, quietly failing in place. As plants faltered, herbivores followed. Large bodies that relied on steady intake found little to sustain them. Predators that depended on active prey soon faced emptiness. The collapse moved upward through ecosystems, not as a sudden wave, but as a series of delays that compounded into absence. What made this extinction distinct was not just loss, but misalignment. Creatures remained alive in a world that could no longer support the way they lived. Oceans felt the change differently, but no less severely. Cooling waters altered currents, productivity dropped, surface layers lost stability, while deeper zones shifted chemically. Marine food chains fractured as plankton declined. The seas remained vast, yet their ability to nourish life diminished. Survival depended on depth, temperature tolerance, and access to remaining sources of energy. In this transformed world, location mattered more than lineage. Survival did not belong to the largest populations or the longest established dynasties. It belonged to those already positioned where the new conditions were least extreme. Some regions retained pockets of productivity, others offered shelter from heat or cold, still others buffered chemical change. The map of life redrew itself rapidly, favoring geography over heritage. For crocodilian relatives, this moment reinforced patterns already present in their history. Their lives were not spread evenly across open land. They clustered near water, where temperature changed more slowly and food sources diversified. Darkness affected all places, but aquatic systems softened its reach. Decaying matter persisted. Scavenging remained possible. Long periods without feeding did not mean immediate collapse. While many dinosaurs occupied exposed terrains, bound to broad ranges and active lifestyles, crocodilians stayed connected to environments that resisted sudden extremes. Their survival did not require movement across vast distances. It required remaining functional where they already were. In a world where travel became costly and visibility poor, staying put proved safer than seeking escape. This was not a matter of foresight or planning. It was the consequence of long habits aligning with new constraints. Bodies adapted for patience endured prolonged disruption. Metabolisms that slowed without damage outlasted those built for constant activity. Nests placed near water faced fewer temperature swings. Eggs shielded by sediment or vegetation endured conditions that scorched exposed ground. As months stretched into years, ecosystems did not recover quickly. Many never returned to their former complexity. The survivors rebuilt from fragments, assembling simpler systems that functioned under reduced light and altered chemistry. The world continued, but it did so on different terms. The asteroid did not choose winners through strength or intelligence. It altered the rules of survival so abruptly that only certain ways of living remained compatible. Where you lived, how much you needed, and how long you could wait became the defining traits of persistence. In that narrowed space, crocodilian lineages continued quietly, not untouched by loss, but positioned just close enough to stability to remain when much of the rest of the world fell away. After the long disruption settled into a quieter struggle, the shape of survival narrowed further. Land remained unstable, its surfaces altered by loss of vegetation and shifting temperatures. Many open environments offered little shelter from lingering extremes. Yet across continents, another pattern endured with greater consistency. Rivers continued to move. They changed course, rose, and fell, but they did not disappear. In their steady motion, they became corridors of persistence in a fractured world. Freshwater ecosystems carried a unique resilience because water itself moderates extremes. Where land heats quickly and cools just as fast, rivers absorb and release energy slowly. Heat diffuses through depth, cold arrives softened by flow. Even during periods of widespread fire, water creates natural breaks, dampening flames and preserving narrow bands of life along its edges. These zones were never untouched, but they shifted more gently than the surrounding terrain. As forests thinned and soils hardened, rivers continued to gather organic matter. Leaves fell into water long after trees vanished from nearby slopes. Dead plants accumulated in slow-moving channels and floodplains. Insects and small vertebrates persisted within these layered systems, feeding on what remained. Energy moved through freshwater food webs differently than it did on land, passing through decay as much as through growth. This difference allowed rivers to keep functioning when sunlight and vegetation faltered elsewhere. Crocodilian lineages were already woven into these systems long before crisis arrived. Their lives did not depend on uninterrupted grasslands or dense forests. They rested at the boundary between land and water, where movement was optional and resources arrived gradually. When land-based prey declined, fish, carrion, and smaller animals continued to appear. When droughts reduced rivers to thinner threads, deeper pools still offered refuge. Water buffered more than temperature. It softened chemical shifts and reduced exposure to ash and debris. Sediment settled downward rather than lingering in the air. Eggs placed near water experienced fewer extremes than those laid on open ground. Juveniles found cover beneath banks and vegetation mats, protected from rapid environmental swings. Even when rivers flooded unpredictably, movement within water was safer than crossing unstable land. Fire reshaped much of the post-collapse landscape, but rivers resisted its reach. Flames consumed dry interiors and open plains, yet stopped where moisture rose from the ground. Along these edges, pockets of life remained connected through flow rather than proximity. Animals did not need to outrun disaster. They needed only to remain within zones where disaster arrived softened. The importance of rivers as refuges was not a sudden discovery. It was the result of alignment between long held habits and new conditions. Crocodilians did not move toward safety when extinction intensified. They were already there. Their bodies were comfortable in water thick with sediment, low in oxygen, or crowded with decaying material. Their lungs allowed long submersion. Their movement required little energy. Stillness became as valuable as action. Other species entered freshwater systems during crisis, but many arrived as outsiders. Their bodies were not prepared for prolonged immersion or low oxygen environments. Their feeding strategies relied on terrestrial productivity that no longer existed. Crocodilians did not experience this transition as a change of lifestyle. It was a continuation under reduced circumstances. Rivers also connected fragmented landscapes. As continents shifted and ecosystems broke apart, waterways remained pathways through disruption. Individuals could disperse slowly, without crossing hostile terrain. Genetic continuity persisted through meandering routes rather than open corridors. This quiet connectivity helped prevent isolation from becoming extinction. In the long aftermath, as climates stabilized unevenly, rivers continued to anchor recovery. Vegetation returned first along their banks. Insects followed. Fish populations grew denser. From these linear sanctuaries, life expanded outward again. Crocodilians remained present throughout this gradual process, not leading it, but embedded within it. Their survival during this phase did not come from conquest or adaptation under pressure. It came from placement. By living where change unfolded slowly, they avoided the sharpest edges of collapse. Rivers did not eliminate hardship. They reduced it to levels that bodies built for patience could withstand. In that moderated space, crocodilian lineages endured, carried forward by water that continued to flow when much of the land could not. As the world remained stripped of excess, survival settled into a quieter arithmetic. Energy became the rarest currency. Landscapes still carried scars from earlier collapse, and recovery moved unevenly across regions. Food existed, but not in abundance or reliability. In this narrowed world, life persisted only where demand matched supply. The difference between endurance and disappearance often came down to how much a body needed simply to remain alive. Crocodilian bodies were shaped around low demand long before scarcity became the rule. Their internal systems did not burn constantly. Heat was not produced endlessly from within, but borrowed from the surroundings when available. Movement did not require continuous effort. Muscles could remain still without penalty. Organs functioned efficiently at slower rhythms, conserving energy rather than spending it quickly. This design allowed long stretches of inactivity without decline. Warm-blooded animals carried a different burden. Their bodies were committed to maintaining internal heat regardless of external conditions. Even at rest, energy drained away to sustain temperature, circulation, and activity readiness. In times of abundance, this constant output supported speed, endurance, and complex behavior. In times of scarcity, it became a quiet threat. Hunger did not arrive as weakness alone. It arrived as imbalance, as systems demanding fuel that no longer arrived in sufficient measure. As food chains shortened and productivity remained low, many warm-blooded species faced an impossible equation. Their survival depended on frequent feeding within ecosystems that could no longer guarantee it. Each missed meal carried cost. Each day of shortage pulled reserves thinner. Mobility declined. Reproductive success faltered. Populations contracted not through sudden death, but through slow attrition that left few traces. Crocodilians approach starvation differently. Their physiology allowed them to slow the passage of energy through their bodies. Heart rates decreased, digestion paused, muscles rested rather than weakening rapidly. A missed meal did not create urgency. Hunger became something to endure, not immediately resolve. This capacity turned absence into tolerable delay. Starvation does not reward strength or aggression, it rewards efficiency. Bodies that waste little remain functional longest. Digestion that extracts maximum value from irregular meals becomes an advantage. Flexibility in diet matters less than flexibility in timing. Crocodilians could eat infrequently and still persist. When prey appeared, even sporadically, it was enough to carry them forward. This efficiency extended beyond feeding. Growth occurred slowly, avoiding the high energy costs of rapid development. Longevity replaced speed as a strategy. Time itself became an ally, allowing recovery when conditions improved rather than demanding constant success. Where other animals burned through reserves quickly, crocodilians remained intact, conserving structure and function. The surrounding world reflected this shift. Dominant species dwindled. Smaller, less demanding organisms persisted in greater numbers. Ecosystems simplified. Energy flowed through fewer pathways, favoring those that could survive long pauses between inputs. In this context, needing less was not deprivation, it was alignment with reality. Warm-blooded survivors did exist, but often in refuges where food remained dense or predictable. Outside those pockets, the cost of internal heat proved heavy. Every movement carried expense. Every cold night drained reserves. The landscape no longer supported excess output. Only bodies prepared to downshift without harm continued broadly. Crocodilians never needed to relearn how to slow down. Their lineage had long lived within cycles of feast and absence. Droughts and floods, seasonal changes, and variable prey had already shaped their metabolism. The post-collapse world did not demand reinvention. It demanded restraint they already possessed. Efficiency does not announce itself. It leaves no dramatic record. It appears as continuity in stone, as a line that does not break when others end. The advantage of needing less is subtle, but profound. It allows life to wait without unraveling, to persist without progress, to remain present until circumstances shift once more. In a world where starvation became common, power lost meaning, survival narrowed to those whose bodies matched the limits imposed upon them. Crocodilian endurance during this phase reflects no sudden adaptation. It reflects a long familiarity with scarcity, a quiet economy of life that continued to function when abundance vanished from the Earth's surface. As scarcity stretched on, survival became less about movement and more about time. The landscapes that remained habitable did not offer steady rewards. Food appeared briefly, then vanished again. For many animals, this rhythm proved intolerable. Their lives were shaped around pursuit, around frequent intake, around the expectation that effort would be answered. In the slowed world that followed collapse, those expectations dissolved. Crocodilians entered this phase with an unusual advantage. Their bodies could wait without unraveling. Months without food did not translate into immediate decline. Muscles retained strength. Organs continued to function. Bones did not thin rapidly. The passage of time alone carried little cost. This capacity transformed hunger from crisis into interval, something to be endured rather than solved. At the center of this ability lay a metabolism willing to change pace. Instead of operating at a fixed level, crocodilian physiology could descend into a quieter state. Heart rate slowed, energy use narrowed to essentials. Digestion paused without harm. The body shifted into conservation, preserving structure while reducing output. This was not sleep or torpor in the dramatic sense. It was a controlled idling, a biological willingness to remain incomplete for a while. In ecosystems where collapse disrupted food chains unpredictably, this metabolic flexibility became decisive. Animals dependent on frequent feeding faced constant risk. Each failed hunt or missed opportunity compounded stress. Energy debt accumulated quickly, forcing movement even when movement carried danger. Speed, once a pathway to success, became an expense that could not always be repaid. Crocodilians did not chase the landscape for opportunity. They allowed opportunity to return on its own terms. By remaining still, they reduced exposure to threat and energy loss. When food finally appeared, whether as weakened prey, carrion, or drifting remains, it was enough. The body restarted digestion, absorbed what it needed, then returned to waiting. This rhythm altered the meaning of time. For fast-living animals, time without food was loss. For crocodilians, it was neutral. Days accumulated without consequence. Seasons could pass with little internal change. Growth slowed, but continuity remained. Survival became a matter of persistence rather than performance. Metabolism functioned as a switch rather than a constant flame. It could dim without extinguishing. This ability protected internal systems from the damage starvation often causes in other animals. Tissues were not consumed recklessly. Energy reserves were drawn down carefully. Recovery, when it came, did not require rebuilding from collapse. It required only resumption. As environments shifted and stabilized unevenly, patience increasingly separated survivors from casualties. Rapid movement across altered terrain often led into danger, unstable ground, or empty spaces. Those that stayed close to shelter and water, conserving effort, outlasted those driven by urgency. Stillness reduced risk at the same time it reduced demand. Crocodilians embodied this strategy without signaling it outwardly. Their waiting did not look active or clever, it appeared uneventful. Yet beneath that stillness, systems remained intact, prepared to respond when conditions improved. Their success did not depend on predicting the future. It depended on being unchanged when the future finally arrived. Speed offers advantages in stable worlds. It allows capture, escape, and dominance. During collapse, those advantages reverse. Fast metabolisms burn through reserves. Rapid growth demands constant support. Quick decisions become costly when information is limited and environments are unreliable. Patience, by contrast, allows error to pass without penalty. This is not patience as choice, but as design. Crocodilians did not learn to wait in response to disaster. Their lineage carried waiting as a default state. The world's slowing simply brought that trait into alignment with survival. As food webs rebuilt gradually, this mastery of waiting ensured continuity across long gaps. Crocodilians remained present when others flickered out, not because they overcame collapse, but because they did not rush through it. In a planet defined by interruption, the ability to endure absence quietly became one of the most reliable paths forward. As ecosystems thinned and reassembled unevenly, food no longer arrived in familiar forms or predictable sequences. The land and water did not empty completely, but what remained appeared in fragments. Carcasses surfaced unexpectedly. Weakened animals drifted toward shorelines. Fish died in pockets and floated briefly before sinking. In this altered rhythm, survival no longer favored those that hunted best under ideal conditions. It favored those that could accept whatever the world offered without hesitation. Crocodilians occupied this space with ease. Their feeding strategy did not depend on precision timing or narrow preference. They were not bound to a single prey type or hunting method. Their jaws were tools of opportunity rather than instruments of specialization. What mattered was not what arrived, but that something arrived. Living or dead, fast or slow, whole or broken, food retained value regardless of form. This flexibility carried a quiet power during collapse. When food webs fractured, specialized predators faced empty niches. A diet built around a single species or behavior became a liability. If prey declined, the hunter followed. Evolution that refined efficiency under stable conditions narrowed the range of acceptable outcomes. Once those conditions vanished, refinement became restriction. Crocodilians did not require refinement to succeed. Their digestive systems processed a wide range of material without strain. Bone, shell, flesh, and decay passed through without waste. Meals did not need to be frequent or ideal. Even partial feeding sustained them long enough for the next opportunity to appear. This openness allowed continuity across broken landscapes where consistency no longer existed. Rigid diets formed extinction traps quietly. Herbivores dependent on specific vegetation struggled when plant communities shifted. Carnivores tied to particular prey found themselves stranded by absence. Even slight delays between loss and adaptation proved fatal. In contrast, opportunistic feeders bridged gaps without changing identity. They did not evolve new tools, they used existing ones more broadly. Crocodilians also benefited from feeding positions that reduced competition. Scavenging did not demand speed or prolonged pursuit. Ambush favored stillness over endurance. Feeding often occurred at the edges of ecosystems rather than their centers, where remains accumulated and weaker animals gathered. This positioning avoided constant interaction with dominant predators and reduced energy expenditure. The act of eating became quieter and less frequent, but no less effective. Crocodilians did not consume food to fuel growth or expansion, they consumed to maintain. The purpose of feeding shifted from advancement to continuity. Each meal restored balance rather than pushing boundaries. This approach contrasted sharply with species shaped by specialization. Specialized teeth, limbs, and behaviors locked many animals into roles the changed world no longer supported. They could not easily substitute one food for another. Attempts to broaden diets arrived too late. Evolution moved slowly compared to sudden collapse. By the time alternatives were explored, the lineage was already narrowing. Crocodilians avoided this trap by never entering it. Their lineage retained generalist tendencies that appeared unspectacular during times of abundance. They were not the most efficient hunters of any single prey. They were simply adequate at many forms of feeding. This adequacy became advantage when perfection lost relevance. Opportunism also reduced exposure to risk. Rather than chasing scarce prey across unstable terrain, crocodilians often waited for resources to arrive naturally. Floods carried remains downstream. Dying animals moved toward water. This passive intake aligned with their broader strategy of energy conservation and patience. As ecosystems stabilized gradually, this feeding flexibility continued to pay dividends. New prey species emerged. Old ones returned unevenly. Crocodilians adapted without visible change. They did not need to alter morphology or behavior drastically. Their existing toolkit remained sufficient. Eating whatever is left does not suggest desperation. It suggests alignment with uncertainty. In worlds where structure breaks down, success belongs to those who can function without insisting on precision. Crocodilian survival during this phase reflects not clever improvisation, but a long comfort with variability. When extinction narrowed choices, rigidity closed doors, flexibility kept them open. By accepting imperfection as nourishment, crocodilians remained woven into the fabric of life, present in the margins where persistence mattered more than preference. As life continued its uneven recovery across land and fresh water, the oceans followed a different and quieter path into crisis. The sea did not burn or darken in the same visible ways. Instead, it changed internally. Circulation slowed. Layers of water that once mixed freely began to separate. In deeper zones, oxygen thinned until breath itself became uncertain. This suffocation did not announce itself with spectacle. It crept outward through basins and shelves, reshaping marine worlds from the inside. Oxygen loss in the oceans unfolded as chemistry rather than catastrophe. Warmed surface waters became lighter, resting above colder depths instead of mixing with them. Nutrients piled up in stagnant layers. Microbial activity increased, consuming what little oxygen remained. Vast stretches of seafloor slipped into anoxic conditions, places where complex animals could no longer function. Life did not vanish everywhere at once. It withdrew unevenly, leaving expanding voids below. Marine ecosystems were especially vulnerable to this kind of change because they depended on continuity. Many ocean animals required stable oxygen levels throughout their lives. Their bodies were built for constant flow, drawing dissolved oxygen from water moving across gills. When that flow weakened, survival narrowed rapidly. Fish, cephalopods, and many invertebrates lacked the ability to pause their internal processes. Oxygen debt accumulated quickly, and recovery became impossible once thresholds were crossed. As oxygen poor zones spread, entire communities disappeared together. These losses appear sudden in the fossil record, not because death arrived instantly, but because survival left little trace. Shell beds ended abruptly. Reef structures halted growth. Mobile animals fled shallow refuges, only to find deeper waters uninhabitable. The ocean remained vast, yet its usable space shrank dramatically. Food chains in marine environments also proved fragile under oxygen stress. Plankton populations shifted unpredictably. Dead material accumulated rather than cycling cleanly. Scavengers overwhelmed limited zones, then vanished when those zones collapsed. For animals bound to open water or deep habitats, there were few alternatives. Movement offered no escape if oxygen was absent everywhere they could reach. Crocodilian lineages faced these changes from a position of distance. Their lives were never fully committed to the open ocean. While some relatives ventured into marine margins, the core of the lineage remained tied to freshwater and coastal systems, where water continued to exchange with air. Rivers, estuaries, and wetlands renewed oxygen through flow and contact with the atmosphere. Even during periods of broader ocean suffocation, these environments retained pockets of breath. Avoiding full marine dependence reduced exposure to widespread anoxia. Crocodilians did not rely on deep water feeding or long-distance swimming in stagnant seas. Their foraging remained close to shorelines and river mouths where oxygen levels fluctuated but rarely collapsed completely. When coastal waters deteriorated, retreat inland remained possible without abandoning familiar habitats. Their respiratory systems also reflected this boundary life. Lungs, rather than gills, allowed access to atmospheric oxygen regardless of water chemistry. Submersion did not require constant gas exchange with water. Periods spent underwater ended with a return to air, bypassing the chemical constraints suffocating marine animals. This difference insulated crocodilians from the full consequences of oceanic oxygen loss. The separation between ocean and river became more pronounced during these episodes. Where marine spaces closed, freshwater corridors remained open. Life clustered there not because conditions were ideal, but because they were tolerable. Crocodilians persisted within these tolerances, enduring shifts that erased more specialized marine forms. Many marine reptiles of past eras did not share this flexibility. Their bodies and lifestyles depended on stable ocean conditions. Once oxygen levels dropped beyond narrow limits, they had no refuge. The sea that once supported them became a trap defined by its own chemistry. Crocodilian survival through these events did not reflect superiority over marine life. It reflected restraint. By never committing fully to the ocean, the lineage avoided one of extinction's most unforgiving pathways. Their position between land and water allowed withdrawal when marine systems failed, without demanding radical change. As oxygen levels eventually recovered in parts of the oceans, new marine lineages emerged to fill emptied spaces. Crocodilians remained largely unchanged, continuing to inhabit margins where water met air and flow remained constant. Their endurance during suffocating seas reflects a recurring theme across deep time. Survival often belongs not to those who explore every possibility, but to those who remain close to the conditions life can always rely on. As the planet continued to fluctuate between recovery and disruption, the quiet mechanics of temperature took on greater importance. Heat no longer followed predictable patterns. Days could warm sharply, then cool without warning. Seasons blurred, and familiar cues lost their reliability. In this uneven climate, the way an animal handled heat became a decisive factor, shaping how long it could remain functional when conditions offered little stability. Crocodilian survival during these periods rested in part on ectothermy, a body strategy that accepts heat rather than producing it. Their internal temperature rose and fell with the environment, responding gradually rather than resisting change. This connection to surroundings did not weaken them. It allowed them to exist within a wide thermal range without constant internal effort. Energy once spent on generating warmth could remain unused, stored for moments when it mattered more. Animals that generated their own heat carried a steady cost. Internal furnaces burned whether food was abundant or scarce. Even when still, energy flowed outward to maintain balance. In stable worlds, this investment supported sustained activity and complex behavior. During planetary crisis, it became a drain that could not be paused. Each cold night required fuel. Each cool season demanded constant input. Hunger became unavoidable. Ectothermic bodies approached these shifts differently. When temperatures dropped, activity slowed naturally without internal strain. When warmth returned, movement resumed. There was no pressure to fight the environment, only to move with it. Stillness during cold periods did not cause collapse. It became part of the rhythm. Metabolism adjusted downward in concert with temperature, preserving internal systems without consuming reserves. This flexibility reduced extinction risk by aligning energy use with availability. When food chains thinned and feeding became irregular, crocodilians did not face competing demands. Heat did not need to be manufactured. Movement did not need to be constant. Life continued at reduced intensity without internal conflict. Survival became sustainable rather than urgent. The advantage of not generating heat is subtle but profound. It removes a fixed expense from the energy budget. In times of abundance, this may appear limiting. In times of scarcity, it becomes protective. Bodies that generate heat must pay that cost every moment they remain alive. Bodies that do not can wait for conditions to improve without penalty. This energy math shaped outcomes across collapsing ecosystems. Every calorie mattered. Those that spent energy just to exist ran deficits quickly. Those that conserved energy remained solvent longer. Crocodilians, bound closely to environmental temperature, spent little when little was available. Their lives slowed, but their systems held. Cold blood also permitted survival in habitats with wide thermal swings. Shallow waters warmed by day and cooled by night. Riverbanks shifted between sun and shade. Crocodilians functioned across these changes without stress responses that demanded extra fuel. Their tissues tolerated fluctuation rather than resisting it. This tolerance reduced wear on the body during prolonged instability. As climates shifted gradually again, this approach continued to pay dividends. When warming returned, ectothermic bodies resumed activity without needing to rebuild lost condition. There was no long recovery from metabolic exhaustion. The body had waited intact. Warmth arrived as opportunity rather than relief. Ectothermy also reduced dependence on constant foraging. Heat generation often requires frequent intake. Without that obligation, crocodilians could extend fasting without compromising basic function. Energy saved from heat production reinforced their broader strategy of patience, stillness, and low demand. This does not suggest that ectothermy guarantees survival. Many ectothermic species vanished alongside warm-blooded ones. What mattered was how this trait aligned with other features. Crocodilians paired ectothermy with flexible diets, aquatic refuge, and slow metabolism. Together, these elements formed a coherent response to crisis. During planetary upheaval, life is measured not by speed or complexity, but by balance. Energy must move carefully through systems that offer little margin for error. Crocodilian bodies maintained this balance by letting the world set the pace. They neither raced ahead nor fell behind. They adjusted, conserving what little was available. Cold blood did not make them passive, it made them efficient. In a time when the planet demanded restraint, that efficiency carried them forward, steady and unchanged, through conditions that exhausted many others. As the land continued its uneven recovery, vegetation did not return evenly or reliably. Forests that once anchored entire regions struggled to reestablish themselves. Some areas remained open and sparse, shaped by thin soils, lingering climate shifts, and repeated disturbance. Where tall canopies once moderated temperature and moisture, sunlight now reached the ground unfiltered. Wind moved more freely. The structure that had supported complex life webs loosened, and with it, the systems that depended on plants began to thin. Plant-dependent food chains carry an invisible vulnerability. They rely on consistency across many layers. Plants must grow predictably. Herbivores must find enough to eat at the right times. Predators then depend on the steady presence of those herbivores. When forests collapse or fluctuate too sharply, the disruption travels upward through every level. Even if animals remain alive for a time, the foundation beneath them weakens. Energy no longer moves smoothly from sunlight to leaf to muscle. In many post-collapse landscapes, vegetation returned slowly or unevenly. Some plants grew low and sparse, others seasonal and short-lived. Long-lived trees took generations to reclaim ground. This shift shortened the flow of energy. Large plant eaters struggled first, unable to meet their needs in a world that could not sustain bulk feeding. Carnivores followed, losing prey that had once been abundant. The collapse did not require total deforestation. It required only enough instability to break the timing and scale plant-dependent animals relied upon. Crocodilians occupied a different relationship with vegetation. Their survival did not hinge on forests remaining intact. They did not require large grazers to flourish, nor did they depend on dense plant cover for shelter. Their food chains often bypassed plants directly, moving instead through aquatic systems, scavenging, and opportunistic feeding. Energy reached them through fewer steps, reducing the number of points where failure could occur. Shorter food chains carry resilience by simplicity. Each transfer of energy introduces loss and risk. When energy moves from plant to herbivore to predator, disruption at any level weakens the whole. Crocodilians often fed from systems where energy passed through decay, aquatic life, or weakened animals, rather than through tightly structured plant-based hierarchies. This allowed them to remain connected to nourishment even as forests faltered. In rivers, wetlands, and floodplains, vegetation mattered, but it did not need to be stable or tall. Algae, floating plants, and seasonal growth continued even when forests struggled. Detritus accumulated. Small organisms fed on remains rather than fresh growth. Fish and other aquatic animals converted this energy into forms crocodilians could use. This indirect pathway reduced dependence on long-lived plant communities. On land, scavenging further reduced reliance on vegetation. Crocodilians could feed on animals that had already succumbed to hunger or environmental stress. In this way, collapse itself generated opportunity. Death did not remove energy from the system immediately. It rerouted it. Crocodilians waited along these edges, integrated into cycles that functioned even when productivity was low. Species tied closely to forests faced a harsher reality. Nesting sites vanished, shade patterns altered, microclimates shifted beyond tolerance. Even animals that did not eat plants directly suffered as their prey declined. The forest was not only food, it was stability. Without it, complexity unraveled quickly. Crocodilians never required that complexity. Their bodies did not depend on cool understories or layered canopies. They basked in open sunlight and rested in water that buffered extremes. Vegetation provided cover when available, but absence did not break functionality. This independence allowed continuity across landscapes that oscillated between growth and barrenness. As ecosystems rebuilt in fragments, simpler food chains proved more durable. Fewer links meant fewer failures. Energy traveled directly from available sources to those able to use it. Crocodilians fit naturally into this pattern, neither elevating themselves above it nor falling victim to its limits. Their survival through periods of vegetation loss did not come from resisting change. It came from being aligned with a world where abundance could not be assumed. By existing outside the long dependency chains tied to forests, they remained present when those chains snapped. In the quieter structure that followed, shorter pathways of survival carried them forward, steady and unchanged, through landscapes learning how to grow again. As environments stabilized only in fragments, time itself became a resource unevenly distributed. Some species rushed to reproduce, compressing life into short spans shaped by urgency. Others moved more slowly, stretching existence across years that no longer promised abundance. In the quiet aftermath of repeated disruption, longevity began to matter in ways it rarely does during prosperous ages. Crocodilians belonged to the second group. Their lives unfolded at a deliberate pace, shaped by slow growth and extended survival rather than rapid turnover. Youth did not rush toward maturity. Bodies accumulated mass gradually, cell by cell, season by season. This slowness reduced risk during development, spreading vulnerability over time rather than concentrating it into a brief window. When conditions deteriorated unexpectedly, Individuals already alive could simply continue rather than depending on a fragile generation yet to be born. Long lifespans provided continuity when reproduction faltered. After ecological crashes, suitable nesting conditions did not always appear reliably. Floods came at the wrong times. Temperatures shifted unpredictably. Food availability fluctuated year to year. Species reliant on constant reproductive success struggled when even a few seasons failed. Crocodilians faced these interruptions with patience built into their life history. Missing a year did not end a lineage. Survival stretched across decades, allowing recovery to arrive slowly. Longevity also preserved knowledge without learning. Bodies carried adaptations forward intact rather than rebuilding them repeatedly. A crocodilian that survived one period of scarcity could survive another without modification. Experience was stored not in behavior alone, but in persistence. Each individual became a bridge across unstable time, linking past ecosystems to future ones. After major crashes, population recovery depends not only on how fast animals reproduce, but on how many remain alive to do so once conditions improve. Longevity increases that pool. Even when numbers dropped sharply, surviving crocodilians continued to exist within habitats capable of supporting them. When productivity returned unevenly, reproduction resumed from adults already present, not from remnants clinging to extinction. This pattern contrasts with species built for rapid turnover. Short lifespans demand constant replenishment. When crashes remove entire cohorts, recovery stalls. Genetic diversity thins. Chance events take on outsized influence. Longevity dampens this volatility. It smooths population curves by reducing dependence on perfect timing. Growing slowly also carries metabolic advantages that echo through long lives. Energy invested cautiously into growth leaves reserves available for maintenance. Large crocodilians did not emerge quickly, but once established, they remained stable. Their bodies did not require constant renewal at high cost. Tissue maintenance remained efficient. Aging progressed gently, without abrupt decline. Long life also reduced exposure to early mortality. Juvenile stages are often the most vulnerable, sensitive to environmental change. By extending the adult phase, crocodilians spent proportionally less time in these risky conditions. Survival across generations meant fewer transitions where failure could occur. As ecosystems reassembled piece by piece, this stability proved valuable. Recolonization does not always happen through bursts. It often unfolds slowly, guided by individuals already embedded in place. Crocodilians served as anchors within changing landscapes, neither migrating widely nor disappearing. Their presence maintained ecological roles without demanding expansion. This endurance reframed the meaning of success. Survival was no longer about thriving each season. It was about remaining present long enough for seasons to regain meaning. Crocodilian longevity aligned with this reality. Years of scarcity could pass without eroding the integrity of the lineage. Across deep time, extinction filters reward patience. Species that compress their lives into brief moments gamble everything on consistency. Species that stretch existence across many cycles hedge against uncertainty. Crocodilians embodied this hedge. Their slow growth did not signal inefficiency. It signaled alignment with a world where stability arrives late and leaves early. By living long, they allowed recovery to come to them. Survival became something measured across generations rather than moments, across eras rather than seasons. In a planet defined by interruption, endurance across time itself became one of the most reliable strategies life ever produced. As survival stretched across long interruptions, reproduction shifted from urgency to patience. The landscapes where life continued were rarely stable enough to reward precise timing. Floods arrived early or late. Droughts lingered without pattern. Temperatures drifted outside familiar bounds. In such conditions, reproducing quickly did not guarantee success. It often multiplied risk. For crocodilians, continuation of the lineage followed a quieter logic, one shaped by flexibility rather than haste. Their nesting strategies reflected this calm restraint. Crocodilians did not rely on a single, narrow set of conditions to reproduce. Nests appeared along river banks, within vegetation mounds, in sandy margins, and in sheltered ground above fluctuating water lines. This diversity did not demand perfection, it allowed adjustment. If one area failed in a given year, another might succeed. Reproduction spread across space rather than being pinned to one ideal setting. Timing, too, remained adaptable. Nesting did not depend on exact seasonal markers that collapse could erase. When conditions aligned sufficiently, eggs were laid. When they did not, reproduction could pause without catastrophic consequence. Long lifespans reduced pressure to succeed every cycle. Missing a season did not shorten the future. Survival extended far beyond immediate output. Eggs themselves carried resilience. Enclosed within protective shells, they existed apart from direct dependence on ongoing conditions. Development proceeded slowly, insulated from brief environmental swings. Moisture mattered, but exact temperatures did not need to remain fixed. Eggs endured partial burial, shifting sediment, and temporary exposure without immediate failure. In this way, reproduction tolerated uncertainty rather than demanding control. During periods of chaos, waiting became part of success. Eggs could remain viable through interruptions that would destroy live-bearing systems. Floodwaters might recede, temperatures might normalize, ash and debris could settle. The pause did not end development, it merely slowed it. When stability returned even briefly, hatching followed. This approach favored resilience over synchronization. Many species relied on narrow windows where everything needed to align at once. Food availability, predator absence, and climate conditions all had to coincide. In disrupted worlds, those coincidences rarely occurred. Crocodilians reduced this dependency by allowing different elements to fall into place at different times. Parental behavior also reflected moderation. Nest guarding occurred when possible, but absence did not guarantee loss. Young emerged with instincts sufficient for immediate survival. They did not require prolonged care that demanded constant food and stable surroundings. Early independence reduced strain on adults and allowed reproduction to continue even when resources remained limited. By spreading reproductive effort across long spans of time, crocodilians avoided catastrophic failure from single events. A flood that destroyed one nest did not erase a generation. A drought that delayed hatching did not end lineage continuity. Reproduction became distributed rather than concentrated, buffered by patience. This strategy worked because survival itself did not depend on rapid population growth. Crocodilians did not need to fill empty ecosystems quickly. Their niches persisted at low density. Recovery did not require numbers to surge. It required presence to continue. Even a few individuals could carry the lineage forward while environments stabilized gradually. Eggs that could wait out chaos complemented all other aspects of crocodilian endurance. Low energy demands sustained adults during lean periods. Long lifespans allowed missed opportunities to pass harmlessly. Flexible diets and habitats ensured that when young emerged, something would remain to support them. Across deep time, extinction punished urgency. Species that demanded constant success collapsed when conditions refused to cooperate. Crocodilians replaced urgency with allowance. They reproduced when the world permitted it and waited when it did not. There was no race to recover, no need to hurry life back into abundance. Reproduction without urgency did not slow their story, it preserved it. In a planet defined by interruption, the ability to delay without loss became one of the most dependable paths through uncertainty. Eggs resting quietly beneath shifting ground carried the future forward, unbroken by the chaos above them. As ecosystems thinned and pressure settled into every corner of the planet, bodies began to change in quiet ways. Not through sudden leaps or dramatic transformations, but through a gradual narrowing of scale. Fossil layers from periods following collapse reveal this pattern with subtle clarity. Crocodilian remains from these intervals often belong to smaller forms, lighter builds, and shorter lengths than their ancestors. The lineage did not vanish. It contracted, adjusting itself to fit within a reduced world. This shrinking was not weakness, it was response. Size carries advantages when resources flow freely. Large bodies dominate competitors, regulate temperature more steadily, and travel farther between meals. During scarcity, those advantages reverse. Every increase in mass demands additional energy. Every movement costs more. Hunger arrives faster and lasts longer. In a world where food appeared intermittently and unpredictably, large size became a liability that few could afford. Smaller crocodilian forms required less to survive. Their bodies demanded fewer calories for basic function. Growth slowed naturally and stopped earlier. Territories shrank. A single feeding event could sustain them longer. These differences did not require new behaviors. They emerged from the same physiological framework expressed at a different scale. Downsizing also reduced exposure to risk. Smaller animals could shelter more easily along riverbanks, within vegetation, or beneath debris. They could use narrower channels and shallower water, avoiding competition with larger predators. Movement through fragmented landscapes became safer when less distance and less strength were required. Even temperature regulation improved as smaller bodies warmed and cooled quickly in environments where extremes fluctuated unpredictably. The fossil record suggests that this reduction in size occurred more than once. After major extinction boundaries, crocodilian diversity includes forms that would later disappear as conditions stabilized and larger bodies returned. This pattern reflects flexibility rather than linear progress. Size expanded when resources allowed it and contracted when scarcity demanded restraint. The lineage carried both possibilities without abandoning its core structure. For many other animals, size reduction arrived too slowly or not at all. Evolutionary change lags behind sudden collapse. Species locked into large forms faced an immediate mismatch between body and environment. Starvation intensified. Reproduction faltered. Population numbers dropped until recovery was no longer possible. Downsizing as a survival response works only when a lineage already tolerates variation. Crocodilians tolerated that variation because their survival did not depend on constant growth. Individuals could mature at smaller sizes without losing reproductive capability. Smaller adults remained fully functional. Teeth, jaws, and hunting strategies scaled down without breaking. No essential system required mass to operate. Scarcity rewarded this flexibility. A smaller crocodilian could wait longer between meals, survive in habitats unable to support large prey, and recover more quickly after lean periods. Energy budgets balanced more easily. The margin between survival and collapse widened. Downsizing also interacted with reproduction and longevity. Smaller bodies matured slightly faster and required fewer resources to reach adulthood. In unstable environments, this reduced the window of vulnerability. At the same time, long lifespans allowed individuals to persist even when growth slowed. The lineage did not gamble everything on speed. It balanced size, time, and energy carefully. This response reframes extinction as a process of adjustment rather than elimination alone. Survival did not always mean holding ground. Sometimes it meant yielding scale while preserving form. Crocodilians did not defend their size against a planet no longer able to support it. They receded, quietly matching themselves to what remained. As conditions improved, some lineages expanded again. Others remained small and eventually vanished. What persisted was not a single shape, but a range of possible expressions carried within the same ancient blueprint. This internal flexibility allowed crocodilians to pass through narrowed worlds without losing continuity. Shrinking to stay alive did not represent retreat from success. It represented recognition. When resources contracted, life followed. The lineage survived not by insisting on previous abundance, but by accepting less without breaking. In the long memory of stone, smaller bones speak of endurance, of a body willing to become lighter so that it could continue when heavier forms could not. As time stretched onward and landscapes continued their slow reshaping, change itself became less dramatic. After repeated crises, the planet no longer rewarded constant reinvention. Stability, when it appeared at all, arrived unevenly and without promise of permanence. In this environment, the pace of evolution shifted. Some lineages raced forward, adapting rapidly to fleeting conditions, only to vanish when those conditions slipped away. Others changed almost imperceptibly, carrying familiar forms across vast spans of time. Crocodilians belong to this second story. Their bodies altered slowly, accumulating refinements rather than transformations. Limbs shortened or lengthened by small degrees. Armor thickened, jaws strengthened, proportions adjusted, yet the overall design remained recognizable across millions of years. This was not stagnation. It was conservation, an approach to survival rooted in the reliability of a form already well matched to a wide range of conditions. Stable designs do not demand reinvention because they do not rely on narrow circumstances. Crocodilian anatomy functioned across heat and cold, abundance and scarcity, land and water. Each component supported the others without excess specialization. When the world shifted, there was no single point of failure. The design bent slightly, absorbed pressure, and returned to balance. Rapid evolutionary change carries risk. It ties survival to precise environmental states. When those states vanish, newly refined traits lose their advantage. In contrast, slow change preserves compatibility. Crocodilians did not chase short-lived opportunities. They retained structures capable of functioning under many regimes, even when none of them were ideal. This conservatism extended beyond shape into behavior and physiology. Metabolism adjusted pace without abandoning core processes. Feeding strategies remained flexible without becoming diffuse. Reproductive methods altered subtly while preserving resilience. Each change respected the underlying framework rather than replacing it. The fossil record preserves this continuity with unusual clarity. Crocodilian ancestors appear again and again, altered but familiar, crossing boundaries that erased countless other forms. Their persistence does not reflect evolutionary laziness. It reflects confidence in a blueprint that did not require dramatic revision to remain viable. Standing still in evolution does not mean resisting change entirely. It means changing only when necessary and only as much as required. Crocodilians refine details while leaving fundamentals untouched. Teeth adapted to prey availability, skull shapes adjusted to feeding strategies, body size shifted with resource levels. The core remained intact. This approach proved especially effective in unstable eras. When environments fluctuated faster than evolution could track, conservative designs avoided mismatch. While specialized species struggled to keep pace, crocodilians already fit within the limits imposed. They did not need to arrive at new solutions. They remained within old ones. Conservatism as adaptation also reduced energy costs. Radical change often demands rapid development, restructuring tissues and functions in ways that increase vulnerability. Slow change distributes these costs over long spans. Each generation remains viable without requiring transitional extremes. Survival becomes steady rather than experimental. In the broader pattern of life, crocodilians illustrate an overlooked truth. Progress is not always forward motion. Sometimes it is remaining where conditions intersect safely. Their lineage did not advance toward greater complexity or speed. It remained anchored to effectiveness. As ecosystems rebuilt repeatedly, crocodilians occupied familiar roles without adjustment. Their presence did not reshape environments dramatically, nor did it require fine-tuning to local conditions. This neutrality reduced conflict with change. They neither dominated nor disappeared. They endured. Evolution, by standing still, allowed crocodilians to pass through eras that punished novelty. Their bodies became records not of innovation, but of sufficiency. Each survival reinforced the validity of the design. Each extinction around them underscored the cost of overcommitment. Across deep time, this conservatism created continuity. Crocodilians did not become something new with each crisis. They remained themselves, carrying forward a form capable of absorbing loss without rewriting its essence. In a planet defined by interruption, this quiet steadiness proved not only viable, but enduring, a reminder that sometimes the most effective response to chaos is not to change faster, but to change less. As the long record of stone accumulates, it can create the illusion of uninterrupted endurance. Crocodiles appear again and again across geological layers, familiar in outline and presence. This repetition can mask a quieter truth. Many crocodilian species did not survive. Their bones end abruptly, sealed within sediments that mark changing worlds they could not endure. What continued was not every form, but the lineage itself carried forward through loss. Extinction within the crocodilian family was neither rare nor gentle. Whole branches disappeared as climates shifted, coastlines rearranged, and food webs tightened. Some lineages ventured too far into specialized roles, tied closely to particular prey, habitats, or climate ranges. When those conditions faded, so did they. Others grew too large for the shrinking resources of their time. Some became too marine, others too terrestrial. Each commitment carried risk. These losses remind us that survival is not evenly distributed, even within a resilient group. The crocodiles alive today are not representatives of every experiment that came before them. They are the result of elimination layered upon elimination. Each extinction narrowed the field, removing designs that no longer fit while leaving behind those that remained compatible with changing conditions. The survival of the lineage depended on diversity within restraint. While many species vanished, others occupied positions closer to ecological flexibility. They fed broadly, lived near water but not solely within the sea, tolerated temperature shifts, and conserved energy efficiently. When one form failed, another persisted, maintaining continuity even as individual expressions ended. This pattern is what the fossil filter reveals. The fossil record does not preserve everything equally. It records what lasted long enough and broadly enough to leave repeated traces. What disappears early or exists briefly often leaves little evidence. Crocodilian fossils that appear stable across time represent survivors of many unseen failures. The fossil filter compresses complexity. It smooths irregularity into apparent steadiness. Gaps represent extinction just as much as continuity. A lineage that appears unchanged is often one that repeatedly shed variation until only the most enduring forms remained. This makes crocodilian survival appear simpler than it was. In reality, persistence required constant pruning. Understanding this reshapes the idea of success. Crocodilian endurance was not a single triumph passed down intact. It was a series of survivals interrupted by many endings. Each extinction removed options. What remained was not perfection, but adequacy under pressure. The lineage did not protect every branch equally. It allowed experimentation within limits. When experiments failed, the lineage continued without them. This flexibility at the level of the group mattered more than the fate of any one species. Survival played out across millions of years, measured not by individual success stories, but by the maintenance of a viable core design. This perspective also counters the myth of inevitability. Crocodiles did not survive because they could not fail. They survived because failure occurred often, removing forms that drifted too far from resilience. The fossil record holds these disappearances quietly, overshadowed by the continuity of related survivors. Extinction shaped crocodilian history as much as survival did. It refined the lineage by subtraction. Traits that demanded excess, rigidity, or narrow dependence were gradually erased. What endured aligned closely with the constraints imposed by an unstable planet. The crocodiles seen today represent a filtered outcome, not a frozen past. Their presence speaks to what remained after many versions were tested and lost. The fossil filter reminds us that deep time does not reward persistence alone. It rewards alignment across change, even if that alignment emerges only after many forms fall away. In this light, crocodilian survival becomes less a story of invincibility and more a record of endurance shaped by loss. The lineage survived, not because every member did, but because enough did, in forms willing to remain within the narrow margins life allowed. When the present is viewed alone, it can appear deceptively complete. Crocodiles move through modern rivers and wetlands with an air of permanence, as though their survival was always assured. Their continued presence invites the impression that they represent success carried cleanly forward from deep time. Yet this perspective is shaped by absence more than abundance. What remains visible today is only what passed through countless filters, not a full record of what once existed. Survivorship bias in deep time arises because extinction erases its own evidence. Species that failed leave behind fragments, often brief and scattered. Those fragments are harder to notice than continuity. The creatures that survive become anchors in the fossil record, appearing again and again, while the many that vanished fade into gaps. This imbalance can distort understanding, making endurance appear simpler and more inevitable than it ever was. Crocodiles are often described as ancient survivors, but the forms seen today represent only a narrow slice of a once broader range. The fossil record holds hints of crocodilian diversity that no longer exists. Shapes that moved differently, fed differently, and occupied habitats now empty ended quietly. Their absence shapes the narrative as much as the presence of their relatives. Seeing crocodiles today does not mean their survival path was direct. It means their lineage endured repeated narrowing. Each extinction event removed options. Each environmental shift tested variations. What passed through was not the most abundant or dominant, but the most compatible with long periods of constraint. The survivors appear stable because everything less stable is gone. This effect hides the scale of failure that preceded survival. For every lineage that crossed an extinction boundary, many did not. Their remains exist only as brief appearances, sometimes reduced to isolated bones or impressions. Over time, erosion and geological change further erase these traces. The result is a record weighted toward continuity, even when discontinuity dominated experience. Survival in deep time is therefore not a measure of superiority. It is the outcome of elimination layered over immense spans. Traits that demanded excess disappeared. Specializations tied to narrow conditions vanished. What remained clustered around tolerance, efficiency, and restraint. Crocodilian survival reflects this filtering, not exemption from it. This realization reframes endurance as a collective outcome rather than a single success story. The lineage persisted because some members always occupied positions close enough to changing limits. Others ventured beyond and were lost. The present reflects the sum of those losses, not their absence. Survivorship bias also compresses time. Millions of years of struggle appear flattened into apparent steadiness. Fossils that occur repeatedly across layers give the impression of unbroken continuity. In reality, those layers represent countless generations facing uncertainty, scarcity, and change. The gaps between appearances matter as much as the appearances themselves. Understanding this bias softens the mythology of invincibility. Crocodiles did not overcome extinction through dominance or inevitability. They remained because enough of them stayed within survivable margins while others fell away. The lineage endured by shedding variation that no longer fit, again and again. The many failures never seen shaped what remains visible. Each extinction pruned branches that leaned too far into risk. What survived leaned inward toward balance. Over time, this process produced a lineage that appears resilient, not because it never failed, but because failure was constant and selective. In deep time, visibility is not evidence of ease, it is evidence of endurance after loss. Seeing crocodiles today reveals more about what was eliminated than what was preserved. Their presence marks the endpoint of countless disappearances, a narrow path carved through vast possibility. Survival, then, is not proof of destiny. It is the quiet residue left after subtraction. Crocodiles remain, not because extinction spared them, but because extinction shaped them through continual removal. What moves through modern rivers carries with it the weight of what did not make it, a living reminder that deep time favors compatibility, not certainty, and that what endures does so through relentless filtering rather than guaranteed success. As ecosystems rebuilt unevenly after each disruption, the balance of power shifted in subtle ways. Dominance, once an advantage, began to carry hidden costs. The world no longer supported stable hierarchies for long. Landscapes changed faster than food webs could adjust. In this environment, standing at the top became a position of exposure rather than security. Apex predators depend on abundance layered beneath them. Their survival requires many functioning levels below, each transferring energy upward with minimal interruption. When those layers weaken, the apex feels the loss immediately. Hunger arrives quickly, competition intensifies, movement increases in search of prey that may no longer exist. What once marked success becomes a fragile dependency on a system already under strain. Extinction records show that apex predators often disappear early during collapse. This pattern does not reflect weakness, it reflects structure. The more essential a species becomes to ecosystem function, the more tightly it is bound to stability. When stability breaks, the most interconnected bodies suffer first. Their fall follows not failure of adaptation, but failure of support. Being essential to ecosystems can be fatal because it leaves no margin. Keystone species shape environments through their presence. They regulate populations, influence vegetation, and maintain balance through activity. This role demands continuity. It requires the world to remain legible and responsive. During collapse, the environment stops responding. Feedback loops break. The system no longer rewards regulation, it punishes dependency. Crocodilians never occupied this role fully. They influenced their surroundings, but did not define them. Their absence would alter local dynamics, yet ecosystems did not depend on them to function. This distinction mattered. Remaining just below the peak reduced obligation. They consumed what was available without driving the system. They waited rather than controlled. This position protected them from cascading failure. When prey declined, crocodilians adjusted rather than collapsed. They did not require a specific prey population to remain healthy. They did not depend on constant interaction to maintain balance. Their role was permissive rather than directive. Dominance also attracts competition. Apex predators face pressure from rivals of similar size and capability. These interactions demand energy and carry risk. During stable times, competition sharpens adaptation. During scarcity, it accelerates loss. Injuries go untreated. Energy spent on conflict cannot be recovered. Crocodilians avoided these costs by not contesting the highest rank. Their bodies and behaviors favored ambush and restraint, not pursuit across open ground or territorial dominance over wide ranges. This reduced both energy demand and visibility. By staying close to water and operating within narrower spaces, they sidestepped confrontations that intensified during collapse. Ecosystems under stress favor redundancy over hierarchy. When one role becomes too central, its removal destabilizes everything connected to it. Species that operate at the edges of systems, feeding opportunistically and influencing lightly, persist more easily. Crocodilians fit this pattern naturally. Remaining below the peak also allowed flexibility in response. Apex predators often specialize deeply, refining tools and behaviors that leave little room to adapt when conditions shift. Crocodilians retain generalist tendencies within a constrained niche. They could feed, rest, and reproduce under altered circumstances without redefining their role. This strategy does not produce dominance or expansion, it produces continuity. Crocodilians did not rule ecosystems for long spans. They inhabited them quietly, absorbing change rather than shaping it aggressively. Their success lay in compatibility rather than control. Across deep time, dominance proved dangerous because it required the world to cooperate. When the world stopped cooperating, dominant species faced collapse without recourse. Crocodilians required less cooperation. Their survival did not hinge on the system functioning perfectly, only on parts of it continuing to exist. By staying just below the peak, crocodilians avoided the sharpest edges of extinction. They did not climb to prominence, only to be removed when that prominence became unsustainable. They remained present across transitions, not because they were strongest, but because they were not essential. In a planet defined by repeated upheaval, survival favored those who influenced without commanding, fed without controlling, and endured without ruling. Crocodilians embodied this balance. Their restraint allowed them to persist when dominance became one more liability the world could no longer support. As collapse reshaped the planet again and again, certain assumptions quietly dissolved. Intelligence, often celebrated as the pinnacle of survival, proved fragile under conditions that stripped the world of predictability. Brains evolved to navigate complex environments, to learn patterns, solve problems, and make choices among many options. During planetary collapse, those options narrowed until choice itself lost relevance. In stable ecosystems, intelligence offers advantages. Memory guides movement, learning refines behavior. Flexibility allows animals to respond to subtle changes in weather, prey, and social structure. These benefits depend on continuity. Patterns must persist long enough to be learned. Rewards must follow effort. During collapse, the environment stops offering consistent feedback. Signals contradict each other. Learned behaviors no longer apply. The world becomes less a puzzle to solve and more a set of limits to endure. Many intelligent species suffered heavily during mass extinctions. Their brains demanded constant energy to maintain neural activity. Thinking did not pause when food became scarce. Decision-making continued even when decisions no longer mattered. Problem-solving required time and calories that delivered no return. The brain, once an asset, became an expense the environment could no longer afford to support. Planetary collapse removes problems that can be solved and replaces them with conditions that must be tolerated. Darkness cannot be reasoned with. Oxygen loss does not respond to clever behavior. Sudden temperature shifts ignore strategy. No adjustment in hunting technique restores vanished prey. No migration plan overcomes a planet where suitable habitat disappears everywhere at once. Intelligence finds no leverage when the system itself has failed. During such moments, biology outweighs behavior. Bodies continue to function or they do not. Metabolisms slow or exhaust themselves. Tissues endure starvation or break down. Survival unfolds beneath consciousness, governed by chemistry, energy balance, and physical tolerance. Thought becomes secondary, unable to override the basic requirements of life. Crocodilians never relied heavily on intelligence to survive. Their behavior remained simple and repetitive, guided by instinct rather than learning. They did not solve new problems each day. They repeated ancient patterns that worked across many environments. This simplicity reduced energy cost and avoided dependence on environmental feedback that might vanish. When food disappeared, crocodilians did not search widely for alternatives. They waited. When temperatures shifted, they adjusted activity passively rather than strategizing. Their survival did not depend on innovation or adaptation through behavior. It depended on internal systems aligned with scarcity. In collapsing ecosystems, cleverness often became noise. Animals that explored widely in search of solutions exposed themselves to danger and exhaustion. Those that experimented burned energy testing options that no longer existed. In contrast, creatures that relied on tolerance rather than response conserved resources. Doing less became more effective than doing something new. Brains also require development time. Long childhoods and extended learning phases increase vulnerability. During unstable periods, juveniles faced harsher odds. Survival favored bodies that reached functional maturity quickly and required little instruction to operate. crocodilians emerged from eggs ready to function, guided by instinct rather than learning. This does not mean intelligence lacks value. It means its value depends on context. Intelligence thrives in worlds that reward foresight and flexibility. Collapse removes those rewards. It flattens the landscape of possibility into survival or disappearance. In that flattened world, the traits that matter sit deeper than thought. Biology sets the boundary within which behavior operates. When that boundary shrinks too far, behavior has nowhere to go. Crocodilian survival illustrates this principle quietly. They endured not by figuring out collapse, but by having bodies that did not require understanding to endure it. The fossil record reflects this outcome without commentary. Lineages associated with complex cognition end abruptly. Others, with simpler nervous systems, persist. This pattern does not reflect failure of intelligence as a concept. It reflects mismatch between cognitive cost and environmental return. Across deep time, survival favors traits that remain functional when information loses value. Crocodilians lived through intervals where knowing more did not help. Enduring required conserving energy, tolerating absence, and maintaining basic function without guidance. During planetary collapse, the world stops asking questions that intelligence can answer. It imposes conditions that only biology can meet. In those moments, survival belongs to bodies prepared to persist without understanding, to systems that carry on even when thought becomes irrelevant. As the long arc of time continued to unfold, survival revealed a pattern that runs counter to modern expectation. The creatures that endured did not always become more capable in visible ways. They did not necessarily grow faster, smarter, or more complex. In many cases, they simply continued, unchanged in the ways that mattered least to survival. Crocodilians embody this quiet truth. Their lineage persisted without chasing progress, carrying forward a form that remained sufficient rather than impressive. Across successive recoveries, crocodilians did not accumulate new abilities layered upon old ones. They did not develop advanced cognition to anticipate danger more cleverly. Their movement did not accelerate to outpace new threats. Their senses did not sharpen dramatically with each passing era. What remained consistent was functionality. The body they carried forward continued to operate within the limits imposed by changing worlds, and that was enough. Evolution is often imagined as a ladder, each rung representing improvement. In reality, it behaves more like a sieve. Traits pass through if they do not conflict with survival. Traits fall away if they demand too much or rely on conditions that vanish. Crocodilians pass through this sieve repeatedly without adding embellishment. Their survival did not require becoming better. It required not becoming worse. Progress assumes direction and destination. Survival does not. During mass extinctions and long periods of instability, there is no clear target toward which life should advance. There is only constraint. Heat, cold, scarcity, and absence define what can persist. In these conditions, adding complexity increases vulnerability. Each new requirement becomes another point of potential failure. Crocodilians avoided this trap by remaining simple where simplicity offered resilience. Their nervous systems remained adequate but unremarkable. Their hunting strategies stayed rooted in patience rather than pursuit. Their metabolism favored conservation over output. These choices did not elevate them above others. They anchored them within survivable bounds. Evolution without improvement does not mean stagnation. Small adjustments occurred, but they did not alter the fundamental character of the animal. Refinements made existing systems more reliable rather than more ambitious. The jaw became slightly more efficient. Armor arranged itself more effectively. Proportions shifted in response to habitat. None of these changes transformed the animal into something new. They kept it working. This pattern stands in contrast to lineages that chased advancement. Some evolved greater speed, larger brains, or highly specialized feeding mechanisms. These traits flourished briefly under stable conditions, then collapsed when those conditions failed. Advancement created dependence. When support disappeared, the advanced form could not function. Crocodilians did not confuse survival with success. They did not optimize for temporary advantage. They optimized for endurance across uncertainty. Their form did not require constant refinement to remain viable. It tolerated imperfection in the environment because it did not rely on precision. Survival without progress also reduced evolutionary debt. Each new trait carries costs. Faster muscles demand more energy. Larger brains require longer development and higher intake. Specialized organs limit flexibility. Crocodilians accrued few such debts. Their energy budgets remained balanced across a wide range of conditions. This restraint allowed their lineage to pass through periods when improvement itself became dangerous. During collapse, the most advanced features often turned into burdens. Crocodilians carried little excess. What they had, they used. What they did not need, they did not build. The fossil record reflects this continuity plainly. Crocodilian forms change little across boundaries that erase countless other designs. This does not mean they were immune to change. It means they were aligned with reality more often than not. They remained within the narrow corridor life could occupy when the planet grew hostile. Survival does not promise advancement. It promises continuation. Crocodilians illustrate that the goal of evolution is not improvement in any absolute sense. It is persistence under constraint. When the world strips away comfort and predictability, only traits that function without support remain. In this light, crocodilian endurance appears neither triumphant nor progressive. It appears appropriate. Their lineage survived, not by becoming something new, but by remaining something workable. Across deep time, that quiet adequacy carried them forward, unchanged in essence, through worlds that punished ambition and rewarded only what could continue without demanding more than the planet could give. As time moved forward, the planet settled into a new kind of restlessness. Stability did not return in long, gentle arcs. Instead, climate began to swing back and forth, tightening and releasing in cycles that reshaped the surface repeatedly. Ice advanced, then withdrew. Warmth spread, then retreated. Seas rose and fell. Landscapes learned to change direction without warning. This climate whiplash did not erase life outright, but it forced continual adjustment. For many species, survival under these conditions demanded constant adaptation. Bodies needed to function across wider temperature ranges. Behaviors had to adjust as habitats transformed. Diets shifted as vegetation zones moved. Yet adaptation takes time, and climate swings often arrived faster than evolution could respond. Traits refined for cold became liabilities under warmth. Warm, adapted forms struggled when ice returned. Each shift created mismatch. Crocodilians approached this instability from a different angle. Rather than reshaping themselves with every climate turn, they shifted position. When conditions cooled, they retreated toward lower latitudes, sheltered waters, and regions buffered from extreme cold. When warmth returned, they expanded outward again. Survival followed movement rather than modification. This strategy relied on geography more than biology. Rivers, coastlines, and wetlands acted as moving boundaries between tolerable and hostile conditions. As ice advanced, these corridors contracted but did not vanish. As warmth spread, they reopened gradually. Crocodilians followed these openings patiently, remaining within zones where temperatures allowed basic function without demanding metabolic change. Moving instead of adapting reduced risk. Evolutionary change carries cost and uncertainty. A body reshaped for one climate may fail in the next. Relocation preserves proven design. By remaining within familiar thermal limits, crocodilians avoided the need to reinvent themselves with each swing. Their bodies continued to operate as intended, provided they stayed in the right places. Geography became a survival strategy embedded in habit. Crocodilians did not migrate rapidly or over vast distances. Their movement was gradual, guided by water systems that shifted over long spans. Rivers carved new paths, coastlines drifted, habitable zones slid across the map. Following these slow changes required patience rather than speed. This approach contrasted sharply with species tied to fixed regions or narrow climate bands. Animals dependent on high latitudes or specific ecosystems faced repeated displacement without refuge. When ice advanced too far, there was nowhere to go. When warmth arrived suddenly, suitable habitats fragmented or vanished. Many lineages failed not because they lacked strength or intelligence, but because geography closed around them. Crocodilians rarely faced this trap. Their preferred habitats stretched along broad belts of the planet, offering alternate locations as conditions shifted. Freshwater systems connected regions that might otherwise isolate populations. Even during colder intervals, pockets of warmth persisted within river valleys and coastal zones. These pockets became anchors of continuity. Climate whiplash also altered rainfall patterns. Wetlands expanded and contracted. Floodplains shifted position. Crocodilians adjusted by remaining close to water, letting changing shorelines guide their presence. Movement did not require exploration of new lifestyles. It required remaining attuned to where water continued to flow. This reliance on geography reduced selective pressure on physical traits. Instead of evolving thicker insulation or higher heat tolerance, crocodilians avoided extremes altogether. Their bodies stayed within operating limits, conserving energy that might otherwise be spent on adaptation. Range shifts also softened the impact of rapid change. While climate swung sharply at global scales, local transitions occurred more slowly. Moving with those local shifts allowed crocodilians to experience climate change as gradual drift rather than abrupt shock. Survival unfolded over distance rather than transformation. Over repeated cycles, this pattern reinforced itself. Lineages that remained geographically flexible persisted. Those that became pinned to specific regions vanished when those regions changed beyond tolerance. Geography selected for mobility of placement, not speed of movement or novelty of form. The fossil record reflects this dynamic quietly. Crocodilian remains appear in different latitudes across time, tracking warmth and retreating from cold. Their forms remain similar while their locations change. This stability amid motion underscores a core truth of their endurance. Survival through climate whiplash did not require mastering extremes. It required staying near moderation. By letting geography absorb change and by following it patiently, crocodilians avoided the constant pressure to adapt. Their success lay not in resisting a restless planet, but in moving gently with it, remaining always where life could still continue. As the story approaches the present, continuity can begin to feel like certainty. Crocodiles still move through rivers and wetlands, their shapes familiar, their behavior steady. After surviving upheavals that reshape the planet itself, their presence can suggest permanence, as though endurance has hardened into immunity. This impression is understandable, but it rests on a fragile assumption. Survival in the past does not guarantee safety in the present. Modern crocodiles live in a world unlike any they have encountered before. The changes now unfolding do not move with the slow rhythm of climate cycles or geological pressure. They arrive compressed into decades rather than millennia. Habitats shrink abruptly, waterways are rerouted, dammed, drained, and polluted. Coastlines harden, wetlands vanish not through gradual shift, but through deliberate removal. The environment's crocodilians depend on disappear faster than patience can answer. Natural extinction unfolds through broad pressures that allow time for movement, adjustment, or reduction. Human pressure compresses those pressures into narrow windows. Rivers do not slowly change course, they are blocked. Forests do not thin over generations, they are cleared in seasons. Chemical changes arrive suddenly, not as gradual drifts. These shifts overwhelm strategies shaped for a slower Earth. Ancient resilience relied on space and time. Crocodilians survived by retreating into refuges, by wading through scarcity, by following water as it shifted across continents. Today, refuges are fragmented. Migration corridors end abruptly at concrete barriers. Waiting becomes dangerous when environments continue to degrade without pause. Stillness no longer guarantees safety. Human influence alters not just landscapes, but the rules of survival. Fishing reduces prey availability. Pollution accumulates in bodies built to endure natural scarcity, not synthetic toxins. Boats introduce constant disturbance into habitats once defined by quiet rhythms. Direct conflict increases as human settlements expand into river systems. Survival becomes constrained not by planetary limits, but by proximity to human activity. These pressures do not resemble previous extinctions. They are selective in unfamiliar ways. Crocodilians are not removed because the climate swings beyond tolerance or because food webs collapse slowly. They are removed because their habitats are no longer allowed to function. The systems that buffered heat, drought, and fire now fail under entirely different forces. Ancient strategies begin to falter under this weight. Low energy demands cannot compensate for poisoned water. Patience cannot outlast permanent habitat loss. Flexible diets cannot solve absence when prey species are overharvested or replaced. Geographic movement loses meaning when suitable environments no longer connect. This does not erase crocodilian resilience, it reframes it. Their endurance was shaped by natural processes that, while severe, preserved continuity of space and time. The present disrupts both. Survival now depends on factors external to biology. Protection, regulation, and coexistence shape outcomes as much as any trait carried in bone. The illusion of invincibility arises from misunderstanding survival as momentum. Crocodilians are not still here because extinction missed them. They are here because previous changes allowed alignment. When alignment disappears, even the most enduring lineages face risk. Modern extinctions unfold quietly, often without spectacle. Populations thin at the edges. Genetic diversity narrows. Local losses accumulate before global awareness arrives. By the time decline becomes visible, recovery may already be difficult. Crocodilians stand at this threshold today. Their past does not shield them from present forces. Ancient success does not function as armor. The strategies that once carried them through planetary upheaval operate within limits that human pressure ignores. Their continued presence now depends less on endurance and more on restraint beyond their control. It depends on whether space remains for water to flow freely, for wetlands to breathe, for silence to return between disturbances. In this sense, the story of crocodilian survival has entered a new phase, one shaped not by geology or climate, but by choice. The illusion of invincibility fades when viewed closely. What remains is not inevitability, but vulnerability. Crocodilians survived because the earth allowed time and room for patience to work. Whether that allowance continues will determine if their ancient strategies remain sufficient or if even the longest endurance must finally yield to a world changing too fast for waiting to save it. The present moment rests within a transition unlike those that came before. The planet has entered another period of loss, one that spreads across continents and oceans with growing reach. Species decline in patterns that echo past extinctions, yet the driving force feels unfamiliar. This time, the pressure does not arise from volcanic fields or shifting continents. It emerges from a single species, reshaping the Earth at a planetary scale. Humans have become a geological force not through sudden catastrophe, but through accumulation. Cities expand where floodplains once slowed rivers. Roads divide wetlands into fragments too small to function as living systems. Agriculture replaces layered ecosystems with simplified surfaces that move nutrients quickly and retain little resilience. Carbon released into the air alters climate faster than many organisms can track. Each action alone might seem modest. Together, they rival the forces that once defined mass extinction. This extinction differs in tempo as much as in origin. Past collapses unfolded across spans that allowed some movement and adjustment. Even the most violent episodes left behind gradients of change. Habitats shifted, but rarely vanished everywhere at once. Today, loss arrives abruptly and unevenly, driven by decisions rather than drift. Entire environments disappear within human lifetimes. Recovery windows close before adaptation can begin. The sixth mass extinction is also selective in new ways. It does not filter life purely by tolerance to heat, cold, or chemical change. It filters by compatibility with human presence. Species that require large, connected habitats decline rapidly. Those that reproduce slowly or depend on specific conditions struggle. Even traits once associated with resilience lose effectiveness when space itself collapses. Crocodilians face this altered landscape with bodies shaped by older rules. Their endurance rested on patience, movement along waterways, and the ability to wait for conditions to return. In the present, waiting often leads to further degradation. Rivers continue to flow, but they are confined, polluted, and interrupted. Wetlands persist in isolated patches, surrounded by development that limits their renewal. Migration corridors dissolve, not through climate shift, but through barriers that do not move. The threats crocodilians encounter now rarely announce themselves dramatically. Nesting sites disappear quietly under infrastructure. Prey declines through overfishing and water quality loss. Juveniles face hazards from machines, traps, and altered shorelines. These pressures accumulate without offering relief, pressing steadily against strategies built for fluctuation rather than removal. This extinction is different because it compresses cause and effect. In past events, the source of pressure often lay beyond the reach of individual organisms. Survival depended on alignment with changing systems. Today, change is driven by behavior that responds to feedback quickly and often intensifies it. Once a habitat begins to fail, human activity frequently accelerates its loss rather than allowing recovery. Crocodilians are not helpless within this process, but their options narrow. Low energy demands do not compensate for disappearing water. Flexible diets cannot solve contamination that accumulates within bodies over time. Longevity cannot offset breeding sites that never return. Strategies refined for scarcity falter under permanence. The presence of humans as a geological force also alters the rhythm of extinction. Loss unfolds unevenly, creating pockets where survival continues alongside areas of complete absence. This patchwork creates the illusion of security, suggesting resilience where only delay remains. Local persistence masks broader decline until connections break entirely. Yet the story does not resolve here. The sixth mass extinction is still unfolding. Its outcome remains shaped by choice rather than inevitability. Crocodilians stand as living indicators of this moment. Species that have endured planetary violence, now confronting a force that reshapes environments intentionally and continuously. Their survival through this era depends less on ancient traits and more on whether space is allowed for those traits to function. It depends on whether rivers can move, wetlands can breathe, and silence can return often enough for patience to matter again. The past shows that crocodilians do not require dominance or speed, they require continuity. The sixth mass extinction threatens that continuity by replacing gradual change with permanent alteration. In this difference lies its danger. What once carried life through catastrophe now meets a challenge that does not recede on its own. The presence of crocodiles today should not be read as proof of invulnerability. It is a reminder of endurance tested repeatedly, now facing a kind of pressure that history has not prepared it for. Whether that endurance continues depends not on deep time, but on the decisions shaping the present. As the timeline draws closer to the present, the comfort offered by endurance begins to thin. Survival through deep time can appear to promise continuity, as though passing countless tests grants immunity from those still ahead. Yet survival does not accumulate protection. It remains conditional, shaped by the nature of each challenge. The forces acting on life today differ not only in origin, but in velocity and structure. The speed of modern change compresses pressure into moments too brief for traditional responses to unfold. Ancient crises, even when severe, usually allowed gradients of time and space. Climates shifted across thousands of years. Sea levels rose and fell slowly enough to leave margins of retreat. Ecosystems unraveled in phases. In contrast, contemporary change advances faster than generational turnover for many species. Temperatures rise within lifespans. Water systems alter course within decades. What once unfolded across eras now arrives within the span of a single life. Crocodilian resilience was built for endurance under slow assault. Their bodies tolerate scarcity by waiting. Their movement follows gradual shifts in geography. Their reproduction accommodates interruption. These strategies depend on time. When time contracts, patience becomes ineffective. Waiting for conditions to improve loses meaning when conditions continue to deteriorate without pause. Habitat fragmentation compounds this compression. Landscapes once continuous now exist as isolated pieces, separated by barriers that do not soften with time. Rivers no longer flow freely from source to sea. Wetlands stand cut off from seasonal replenishment. Shorelines harden into fixed borders. Even when conditions remain locally suitable, access between areas disappears. Movement, once the simplest response, becomes impossible. Fragmentation alters survival at the level of population rather than individual. Small groups persist briefly, then fade through inbreeding, accident, or random loss. Recovery requires connection, not just presence. Ancient resilience did not anticipate isolation without relief. Crocodilians survived by shifting within networks of water. Fragmentation breaks those networks entirely. The limits of ancient resilience reveal themselves when flexibility meets rigidity. Past survival relied on environments that changed shape but retained function. Rivers might shift, but they remained rivers. Wetlands expanded and contracted, but water continued to move and renew. Today, function itself disappears. A drained wetland is not a smaller wetland, it is absence. No adaptation addresses absence. Modern pressures also stack rather than replace one another. Climate change arrives alongside pollution, overharvesting, and land conversion. Each adds constraint without removing the previous one. In the past, one stressor often eased as another intensified. Now, stress accumulates. Bodies and systems must absorb multiple impacts simultaneously. Crocodilians carry ancient traits that address scarcity, fluctuation, and patience. These traits do not address toxicity, physical barriers, or constant disturbance. Energy conservation cannot neutralize chemical accumulation. Geographic movement cannot bypass concrete. Longevity cannot compensate for reproductive spaces removed permanently. The illusion that past survival guarantees future endurance arises from mistaking pattern for promise. Crocodilians endured because previous challenges remained within the range their bodies could absorb. The present shifts beyond that range in ways that bypass adaptation entirely. This does not diminish their resilience, it clarifies its boundaries. Resilience is not universal, it is tuned to specific conditions. When those conditions change in kind, not just degree, resilience must be reconsidered. The future of crocodilians depends less on ancient design than on whether the world still offers the slow margins their strategies require. It depends on whether change can decelerate enough for patience to matter again. Without that space, even the most enduring lineages face limits they cannot negotiate biologically. Past survival offers insight, not insurance. It shows what worked when the planet allowed time and continuity. The present tests something different. It tests whether endurance without speed can persist in a world that no longer pauses. As history has shown repeatedly, survival is never guaranteed. It remains a negotiation between life and the conditions it inhabits. The negotiation has changed. Ancient resilience stands at its edge, effective within its design, yet vulnerable when the world moves too fast for waiting to remain an answer. As the long arc of this story settles into reflection, the presence of crocodiles begins to read less like an exception and more like a message. Their endurance does not shout, it does not dazzle with speed or intellect. It rests quietly in bone, posture, and patience, shaped by pressures that erased louder solutions. Across the deep record of life, survival did not consistently reward brilliance. It rewarded what could remain when everything else fell away. Endurance favors traits that operate without urgency. Crocodiles did not win by anticipating the future or mastering complex behavior. They persisted through bodies that tolerated absence, cycles that waited without loss, and systems that demanded little from a world often unable to give much. Their survival reflects alignment with limitation rather than triumph over it. Brilliance shines best in stable times. Intelligence, speed, and specialization flourish when environments provide feedback and reward innovation. Chaos strips that feedback away. In collapsing systems, cleverness cannot restore oxygen to water or bring sunlight through ash. Endurance fills the gap left behind. It does not solve catastrophe, it survives it. The traits that outlasted chaos were often quiet. Low metabolism allowed survival during long intervals without food. Flexible habitat use reduced dependence on single environments. Slow growth and long life softened the impact of failed seasons. Reproductive patience allowed lineage continuity despite interruption. None of these traits appear dramatic in isolation. Together, they form a framework that resists collapse not by force, but by accommodation. Bone preserves this story honestly. Fossils do not exaggerate success. They record what remained functional. Crocodilian skeletons appear again and again, adjusted slightly, never reinvented. Their persistence does not represent evolutionary stagnation. It represents sufficiency under relentless testing. Each bone holds the memory of what did not need to change. Lessons written in bone are lessons in humility. Life does not move toward progress in a straight line. It explores possibilities and then subtracts relentlessly. What remains is not the best in any absolute sense. It is what fits within constraint. Crocodiles fit because they ask little of their surroundings and accepted change without demanding control. This endurance reframes how survival is understood. Survival is not a badge of superiority. It is a condition met repeatedly under stress. Many brilliant forms pass through Earth's history briefly, rising fast and falling faster. Their absence does not mark failure, it marks mismatch. Crocodiles avoided that mismatch by remaining broadly compatible with many versions of a damaged world. Quiet traits persist because they do not announce themselves as vulnerabilities. They do not rely on precision or constant input. They function when signals fade and systems simplify. Patience works when speed fails. Tolerance works when optimization collapses. In this light, crocodiles do not stand apart from life's story. They sit near its center. They illustrate how survival often belongs to those willing to remain unremarkable. Their bodies did not chase novelty. They absorbed change. They endured long enough for chaos to pass or soften. This does not diminish other paths life has taken. It contextualizes them. Innovation has its place. Intelligence reshapes environments and relationships. But across deep time, the longest stories often belong to those who endured without requiring the world to remain kind. Crocodiles reveal that life's deepest lesson is not mastery, but compatibility, not brilliance, but balance. Their survival across multiple ends of the world reflects an agreement with reality rather than resistance to it. The lesson written in their bones is subtle but persistent. When the world breaks, survival does not always belong to the fastest, the smartest, or the most powerful. It often belongs to those who can wait, conserve, and remain within the narrow margins that chaos leaves behind. In following crocodiles through Earth's most violent chapters, the story returns to a simple truth. Life continues not because it overcomes every challenge, but because some forms remain aligned with what remains possible. In that alignment, quiet endurance becomes the longest lasting strength of all. As the story settles deeper into reflection, extinction begins to lose its moral weight. It does not arrive as a verdict, nor does it measure worth. Across Earth's history, extinction has never acted as a judge separating failure from success. It has functioned as a filter, narrowing life through constraint, chance, and compatibility with changing conditions. Extinction does not punish cruelty or reward gentleness. It does not respond to intelligence, effort, or dominance. It responds to fit. When environments shift beyond certain thresholds, bodies either continue to function or they do not. The outcome feels decisive, yet the process remains indifferent. Countless species disappeared not because they were flawed, but because circumstances moved outside the narrow range their biology could tolerate. This filtering process is shaped by randomness, but not pure chaos. Biology sets the boundaries within which chance operates. A sudden drop in temperature may spare one lineage and erase another, not because one was superior, but because insulation, metabolism, or habitat alignment happened to fall on one side of the threshold. Small differences compound quickly under pressure. Survival often hinges on where a lineage stood when change arrived, not on anything it achieved beforehand. Randomness enters through timing and exposure. A population located just beyond a refuge disappears. Another, separated by a short distance, persists. A drought overlaps with breeding season and erases a generation. In another region, timing misses by months and reproduction continues. These outcomes shape the fossil record profoundly, yet they do not reflect intention or judgment. Crocodilians pass through these filters repeatedly, not because extinction favored them morally, but because enough of their lineages repeatedly landed within survivable margins. Their bodies required little adjustment, their habitats overlapped with refuges, their energy demands remained low enough to bridge scarcity. When randomness struck, biology determined whether chance became fatal or survivable. The fossil record, stripped of context, can appear to tell a story of winners and losers. In reality, it records what remained after relentless subtraction. Each extinction removed layers of variation until only forms aligned with constraint persisted. What is visible now is not a collection of champions, it is a remainder. When the noise is gone, what remains is rarely spectacular. Extinction removes excess. It erases specialization that relies on stability. It strips away complexity that demands constant support. Survivors tend to be quieter, broader, and less demanding. They do not dominate, they persist. This filtering does not eliminate beauty or ingenuity. It reduces dependency. Life that continues after collapse often does so with fewer requirements and lower expectations. Crocodilians fit this pattern well. They did not outrun catastrophe, they waited it out. Their endurance came from compatibility, not conquest. Seeing extinction as a filter reframes survival itself. Survival is not proof of deservingness, it is evidence of alignment. Many extraordinary forms vanished through no fault of their own. Their disappearance does not diminish their place in Earth's story. It reflects the narrowing of possibility under stress. This understanding carries weight into the present. When species disappear today, the loss does not signify failure or weakness. It reflects conditions compressed too tightly for biology to adjust. Extinction does not assign blame, it records outcome. Crocodilians remain not because extinction chose them, but because extinction did not remove all forms capable of functioning within altered worlds. Their lineage survived within the narrowing channel life was forced to occupy. When the noise of abundance fades, what remains is not virtue or superiority, it is what still works. Extinction filters life until only those forms remain whose demands align with what the world can still provide. In this way, extinction speaks quietly. It tells no story of justice or cruelty. It leaves behind a reduced chorus composed of organisms that fit within the final constraints imposed by change. Crocodiles stand among those voices, not as symbols of judgment, but as evidence of what endures when the planet grows quieter and the margins grow thin. Understanding extinction this way removes myth and replaces it with clarity. Life continues not because it is rewarded, but because it remains possible. When everything unnecessary falls away, what stays is not chosen, It is what remains. As the long story of Earth settles into its later chapters, the presence of crocodiles begins to feel less like survival and more like testimony. Their bodies carry memory without words. They are not relics preserved behind glass. They breathe, move, and reproduce within landscapes shaped by repeated upheaval. In them, deep time remains alive. Crocodiles have existed through eras when continents tore apart, when oceans lost their breath, when fire swept across forests, and when darkness followed impacts from the sky. They did not observe these events as spectators. They endured them as living participants, bound to rivers and coastlines that absorbed the shock of planetary change. Their survival turns abstraction into presence. What might otherwise remain distant becomes tangible in muscle and bone. To see a crocodile today is to witness a body shaped by planetary trauma. Its armor reflects pressures older than mountains. Its stillness echoes periods when movement wasted precious energy. Its patience mirrors eras when waiting was the only response available. Nothing about its form suggests drama, yet everything about it carries history. Deep time often feels unreachable, buried beneath numbers too large to grasp. Millions of years blur into abstraction. Crocodiles collapse that distance. Their continuity shortens the gap between then and now. The past does not remain sealed behind stone. It moves slowly through water, blinks beneath the sun, and rests along riverbanks. This living record does not celebrate violence. It reveals its cost. Each trait that endures reflects adaptation to damage rather than harmony. Crocodiles did not evolve in peaceful worlds. They were shaped by instability, scarcity, and collapse. Their bodies record what happens when the planet withdraws comfort repeatedly and life adapts to loss rather than abundance. Seeing deep time alive carries emotional weight. Even without instruction, it invites recognition of scale. Crocodiles have persisted through catastrophes that erased entire worlds of life. Their presence reframes modern urgency. It does not diminish current crisis, it deepens it. The contrast between ancient endurance and present vulnerability becomes quietly striking. The emotional weight of endurance lies not in triumph, but in accumulation. Each survival layered onto the last created a lineage that has never known permanence. Stability, when it came, remained temporary. Comfort was always provisional. Crocodiles carry this expectation forward. Their behavior reflects it. They do not rush, they do not waste, they do not assume. This endurance also holds loss. For every crocodile alive today, countless related forms vanished. Their absence is folded into what remains. Endurance is never clean. It contains subtraction. What persists does so alongside what has fallen away. Crocodiles embody this balance. They exist not as symbols of dominance, but as records of persistence under repeated harm. Their survival does not erase suffering, it absorbs it. The lineage continues with fewer variations, narrower margins, and quieter expression. There is weight in recognizing this. It reshapes how survival is understood. Endurance becomes less about strength and more about acceptance of limits. Crocodiles reveal that lasting does not require overcoming violence entirely. It requires functioning within its aftermath. To witness deep time alive also carries responsibility. Living records can vanish. Continuity is fragile. Crocodiles survived planetary forces that moved slowly and left room for patience. The present compresses change into spans that threaten even the most enduring forms. Their presence now feels less like a guarantee and more like a reminder. Earth has been violent before. Life adapted. but adaptation required space, time, and allowance. Crocodiles remind us what endurance looks like when those conditions exist and how rare such conditions truly are. They stand as living archives of a planet that reshaped itself repeatedly without concern for life caught in the process. Their bodies record that history faithfully, without embellishment. In them, Earth's violence is not forgotten. It continues, quietly acknowledged, in the shape of a jaw, the placement of armor, the rhythm of breath. To see a crocodile is to see deep time still breathing. It is to witness endurance that carries memory without words. The emotional weight of that realization does not demand reaction. It settles slowly, like sediment. It reminds us that survival is not a story of victory, but of persistence through loss, carried forward in flesh by those that endured long enough for the world to change again. The story settles not with a conquest, but with a quiet persistence. Crocodiles did not rise to dominance across the planet, nor did they reshape the world to suit their needs. They remained close to water, close to stillness, close to the margins where life could continue even as everything else shifted. Their survival was never about ruling Earth. It was about remaining when Earth changed. Across mass extinctions, climate swings, and slow recoveries, crocodiles endured by waiting. While other lineages raced forward, refined themselves, or expanded into fragile niches, crocodiles conserved energy and space. They stayed where survival was still possible, even when that space narrowed. They accepted long pauses, lean years, and uncertain futures without demanding resolution. Time worked differently for them. It was not something to outrun, but something to inhabit. This patience carried them through catastrophes that dismantled entire ecosystems. When forests fell, they waited by rivers. When oceans lost oxygen, they remained tied to freshwater refuges. When temperatures swung wildly, they shifted ranges rather than reshaping bodies. Survival unfolded not through brilliance or speed, but through alignment with constraint. Their bodies never required perfection from the world. They functioned well enough within imperfection. Resilience, as their story reveals, is not loud. It does not announce itself through innovation or domination. It expresses itself through moderation, efficiency, and refusal to waste. Crocodiles reveal that survival often belongs to those who ask the least and endure the longest. Their lineage persisted not by overcoming Earth's violence, but by absorbing it again and again. Time, in this context, becomes more than a measure, it becomes a filter. Each extinction narrowed possibility, removing forms that could not tolerate loss. Crocodiles remained within the shrinking corridor life could occupy. Their survival was never guaranteed. It was renewed repeatedly through compatibility rather than chance alone. What endured was not strength in excess, but balance. The lesson carried forward in their bones is subtle. Survival does not mean advancement. It does not promise immunity. It does not reward intention. It simply reflects what remains possible when everything unnecessary falls away. Crocodiles did not progress toward something better. They remained something workable. This perspective reshapes how life's history can be read. Evolution is often imagined as ascent, but endurance tells a different story. It speaks of persistence without spectacle, of success measured not in expansion, but in continuity. Crocodiles survived by staying close to what still functioned when the planet grew quiet and harsh. Today, their presence feels like a bridge between eras. They remind us that Earth has been dangerous before, and that life has adapted not through conquest, but through patience. At the same time, their vulnerability now reminds us that resilience has limits. Ancient strategies require time and space to work. When those vanish, even the longest surviving lineages face uncertainty. Their story does not end with certainty or warning, it rests in reflection. Crocodiles waited out the world's worst moments because the world eventually moved slowly enough to allow waiting to matter. Whether that remains true is part of a larger story still unfolding. For now, crocodiles remain living witnesses to deep time, carrying forward a message written not in words, but in form. They show that survival is not about becoming more, but about remaining enough. They show that patience can outlast chaos, and that endurance often leaves the lightest footprint. If this journey through Earth's deep past has stirred something quiet and curious, there are many more stories resting beneath the surface. Each layer of stone holds another lesson, another moment when the planet changed and life responded in unexpected ways. Whenever you are ready, there is always another deep chapter waiting to be explored, slowly, calmly, and together.